got one room. Huh? I didn't want to.
File makeup question. And I think we can do it. I just want to make sure we do it right. You can take, like I have already a database and make a copy of it, right? Just create an extra copy and rename it something else. Okay, just like, make a copy of something. Because I want to take our principal database, make a copy of it, rename it, clean out the stuff, and use it for the superintendent. So we can recreate the same data that we're going to capture. So is that an easy thing?
Yeah, actually Tenica have the access to the server.
So she can
She can make a copy for you. Yeah, no problem. It will be easy. Yeah.
I'll get a hold of her.
Okay, thank you.
Long time no see. You didn't hear your phone ringing when you were walking down that steps?
Give me the name.
We were driving out and I was like, is it Karen now?
Go back to the pictures and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's able to detect location. I asked if it's voice paraphernalia, but I don't think it's. You got nothing going on today? I got money. Don't ask. Don't ask.
There you go. I saw the next thing.
money and we don't have money. Send me these forms, budget this, budget that, business process. There's no.
I need you to give me more money.
Joyce is gonna give everybody.
So,
Is that what you say? Yeah, that's what they said yesterday. Curtis? Yeah, Joyce is gonna be 400,000.
And I don't think
So you haven't read my email report?
no, I did this.
Did it just, how many did you find out? How many did you find out?
Yeah, I got two.
Good.
Good morning. We're gonna go ahead and get started. Some of our, well, the setup this morning is a little different. Typically, we are facing south, but because we're facing one of the dividers, so we're gonna have to be on this side. There is another conference or another training session going on in the other room over there. They're probably going to be a little loud since they're training for teacher activities and collaborating, and so they're going to probably be a little loud. So there's a little bit of a buffer, so try to sort of get a little bit of a distance. Yeah, you know, so we're like, okay. So we need a little more distance now, so. But we could be loud too for them, so. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We do not have any of the safety. I just realized that safety no fire drills or alarms, so scheduled exits on both ends, and then the restaurants are also on both ends. Our next meeting will be on Bill, was out of the 22nd? 22nd, and the agenda should be done already. It's all about purchasing on August the 22nd. A lot of changes and updates on August the 22nd. We're out there. And then also, we have another one on September the 10th, which is a certification for investment manager. And so I sent out emails in case we have some of your folks that may want to become members or certified in investment management. We also have, yay! Our educational certification, especially related to business matters and CFO. In case you want to pursue your superintendency certification, we have a superintendent certificate program that's going to start, and I will send out an invite with probably providing a little bit of a discount to school finance members, so we'll send that out to you guys in case.
Yeah, let's say.
We want to excite them. Now we need to turn on the music and see how they feel. Right? It can be louder. Or fewer or louder. So, okay, so we have several presentations today. I still need to see about the last one, dealing with Microsoft. I got a response from that email address that it was not available anymore, so I need to find out what we'll do with the last presentation. So, but in the meantime, we do have our resident expert on law that deals with, and this is part one, because part one is safety and part two is going to be purchasing next month. And there's quite a lot of things that have changed that I think we need to be aware of from the safety perspective. So please help me welcome Sarah.
Thanks so much. It's good to be back with you today. As Casey said, I will be back on August 22nd, specifically to address the legislative updates relating to purchasing and procurement. Thankfully, there weren't a whole lot. But there is a whole lot on this subject, which is school safety. And unlike what's happening next door, not a lot to cheer about necessarily. But nevertheless, it is, like Casey said, it is a very important topic. There's a lot of slides. I have like 137 slides. I will not bore you with reading through every single one of them, but I did want you to be able to have them in order to take back to your districts and to whoever the key point person, even if it's not you, to review, because there's a ton of brand new requirements requirements, lots of policy, lots of training requirements, and things of that nature. So let's jump in and get started. So we know that the governor had a key focus on safety and on schools this past session. This is a quote from his inaugural address. The state must invest more in public education, improve third grade reading scores, pay teachers more, reduce recapture, make our schools safer, and prepare students for college or career. There were 6 items that were declared in the State of the State as priorities for this session. At least 3, if not arguably 6, all of the 6 related in some way to schools, including the big 3, fix school finance, raise teacher pay, and make schools safer. Most of the key legislative dates have already passed. May 27th was the last day of the regular session. June 16th was the governor's deadline to either sign or veto bills. And August 26th is the generic effective date for bills that did not include a specific effective date within them. Those are the ones that we'll talk about today having a specific effective date within them. Special sessions, general rules, but we'll skip that because the governor has officially told us in all capital letters via a tweet, very official, no special session, see you in 2 years. This is another quote from Governor Abbott. It's simply not enough to give our students a better education. We must also create a learning environment that is safe. And further, no student should be afraid to go to school. No parent should be fearful when dropping their child off at school. Texas must act now to make our schools safer. So we know that there were some key events, primarily the tragedy in Santa Fe, that were leading up to this session, which made school safety such a big focus this past session. May 18th of 2018 was the Santa Fe tragedy and the shooting that occurred that killed 10 and wounded 13. On May 22nd was when Governor Abbott held the first of a series of roundtable discussions concerning school safety. May 30th was when the action plan was released, and in February 5th was when it was declared a legislative priority revolving around school safety. So specifically, what was the legislative response to the Santa Fe tragedy? Both representatives from that area, Representative Greg Bonin and Senator Larry Taylor, filed bills, omnibus school safety bills. Senate Bill 11 is the biggie that we'll talk about today. In total, I think it's something like 85 pages long, single space, so it is a beast. And additionally, another key component was a funding component, and we'll kick off with talking about that. Didn't have a video, but in the interest of time, with regard to signing Senate Bill 11, just a couple more tweets. Today I signed school safety laws in response to the Santa Fe High School shooting. They make our schools safer places for children to learn, for teachers to educate, and for families to gather. So our first big topic is funding. And Senate Bill 11 has added a new school safety allotment. And this requires an annual allotment in accordance with ADA to be used for improving school safety and security, including in these 4 key areas that we're going to go through. And it authorizes the school district to use funds that are allocated under this section, also for specifically equipment and for software. So the first key item that you can use the school safety allotment for is for securing school facilities. And these are things like improvements to school infrastructure, use or installation of physical barriers, and the purchase and maintenance of security cameras and equipment, as well as technology to facilitate communication and information sharing. The second component that you'll be able to use your school safety allotment for is for providing security for districts, which specifically includes employing district peace officers, private security officers, and school marshals, as well as assigning SROs through memoranda of understanding. The third component is school safety and security training and planning. This includes active shooter and emergency response training, prevention and treatment programs for adverse childhood experiences, and the prevention, identification, and management of emergencies and threats, including mental health personnel and support, behavioral science, health sciences, and developing threat reporting systems. Another thing that Senate Bill 11 did was amend the bond issuance existing statute in the Education Code that specifically now says that you can include in your bond issuance and issue bonds for the retrofitting of school buses with emergency safety or security equipment, as well as the purchase or retrofitting of vehicles to be used for emergency safety or security purposes. So that's the big funding piece. The last I had heard was from Chief Kimberly at Klein ISD, and I think he said that the amount was something like $10. Has anybody heard differently per ADA? So we'll see exactly what the numbers are going to fall out to be. Facility standards is another big piece this session, including in Senate Bill 11, which adds a provision to the Texas Education Code to state that the commissioner must adopt or amend rules as necessary to ensure that building standards for instructional facilities and other school districts and charter school facilities provide a safe and secure environment. They have to include best practices for the design and construction of new facilities, as well as the improvement, renovation, and retrofitting of existing facilities. The commissioner has to review and update as necessary these rules at no later than September 1st of each even-numbered year. Senate Bill 11 also addresses this portable buildings and says that not later than January 1st of 2020, the Texas School Safety Center must develop a list of best practices for ensuring the safety of students who are receiving instruction in portable buildings, as well as provide information regarding the best practices to the districts who are using portable buildings for student instruction. The next topic is a huge one, and it's policies and training. Senate Bill 11 amends an existing provision of the Ed Code, you'll see in lots and lots of these slides that the Texas School Safety Center now has a lot of additional responsibilities, and one of them is included here. Previously, under the old law, the center had a registry of individuals who could provide safety-related training for school districts. But under the old law, they specifically said that the inclusion of a person in the registry was not an indication of the person's qualifications or their ability to provide consulting services to school districts. Now it's the opposite. In fact, the center now has the outright obligation that they must verify that the person's qualifications and their ability to provide school safety or security consulting services before adding that individual to the registry. Sorry, I'm not doing well with slides today, sorry about that. There's also a new requirement for a trauma-informed care policy that has to be included in both in the district's improvement plan. It has to specifically address use of TEA-developed resources, methods for increasing staff and parent awareness of trauma-informed care, and the implementation of trauma-informed policies and care, practices in care, as well as available counseling options for students affected by grief or trauma. There's also a training component. The training must be provided through a program selected from the list that's available, and during any new employee education for all new district educators, as well as to existing educators at a schedule adopted by TEA rule. There's also a component in the statute that requires districts to maintain a list of each staff member who's participated in the training, and you have to annually report to TEA certain information relating to the training, including the number of staff who completed the training. Further, in Senate Bill 11, this specifically actually requires the commissioner to provide a waiver permitting a fewer number of minutes of operation and instruction time for a district that required its employees to attend an improved school safety training course. So the idea here is we can reduce school staff time in order to complete this training because it's so important. A new provision of, or rather, an amendment to an existing provision of the Education Code has grief and trauma training requirements, continuing education requirements for classroom teachers now must specifically include how grief and trauma affects student learning and behavior, and that training must be approved by the commissioner. House Bill 2195 adds new policy and training requirements for active shooter emergencies. This one's already effective, was effective as of June 14th. For the policy requirement, you now must have a policy for responding to an active shooter emergency, and that's got to be included in your emergency operation plan. And community resources can be used to develop that plan. For the training requirement, school district peace officers, or SROs, must complete training that's approved by TCOL specifically for active shooter emergencies. House Bills 403 and 111 address sexual abuse, human trafficking, and other maltreatment of children. And two main requirements, you're seeing consistency here, right? Policy and training. The training requirements, interestingly, here apply to boards of trustees, to superintendents, as well as to public school employees. And we'll go through each of those. With regard to the trustee training requirements, the State Board of Education now must require each trustee to complete every 2 years at least 4 hours of training, including 3 hours in evaluating student academic performance and 1 hour consisting of identifying and reporting potential victims of sexual abuse, human trafficking, and other maltreatment of children. The training must be research-based and designed to support the oversight role of the Board of Trustees under Section 11 of the Texas Education Code. The timing requirements are a little bit different depending on whether it's the Board of Trustee, a new trustee, or a returning trustee. House Bill 403. House Bill 403 adds a training requirement for superintendents relating to identifying and reporting potential victims of sexual abuse, human trafficking, and other maltreatment of children to the existing training requirements for superintendents. It's at least 2.5 hours every 5 years, but it's a rolling implementation. A superintendent who's subject to the continuing ed requirements immediately before the September 1st, 2019 effective date of this bill, those individuals are not required to comply with the new requirements until January 1st, 2021. House Bill 111 reenacts and amends an existing provision of the Education Code, of course, includes policy and training requirements. This one is applicable beginning with this upcoming school year, the 1920 school year. It's applicable to both districts and to open enrollment charter schools. The proponents of this bill said that House Bill 111 would extend existing training requirements for public school employees to better protect the most vulnerable to sexual abuse and human trafficking. It went on to say that the children with cognitive disabilities experience abuse and human trafficking at much higher rates than children without disabilities and are less likely to actually report abuse. And so in this instance, the Texas Education Agency would develop resources for the training. And so the proponents said districts wouldn't have to develop their own or create new materials, and so that would be a benefit. The policy requirements, now we have to have a policy addressing sexual abuse, sex trafficking, and other maltreatment of children, and that's got to be included in both the district improvement plan as well as any student or parent handbook. What's going to print like in the next couple weeks? Student and parent handbooks. And so we'll have to make sure that this new requirement is included because it is required for the 1920 school year. This allows collaboration with local law enforcement and other consultants to create the policy as well as to create a referral protocol for high-risk students. By statute, the policy has to specifically address the methods for increasing staff, student, and parent awareness using resources adopted by TEA or the Commissioner, including resources adopted by TEA under the specific Chapter 38 of the Education Code. actions child victims should take to obtain assistance and intervention, as well as available counseling. House Bill 111 also has employee training requirements that have to include prevention techniques for recognition of sexual abuse, sex trafficking, and all other maltreatment of children, including now specifically for children with significant cognitive disabilities. This is applicable to all new employees and to existing employees on a schedule that's to be adopted by TEA rule until eventually all employees have undergone the training. The training has to specifically include the things that are listed here. What are those factors indicating that a child is at risk for sexual abuse, sex trafficking, or other maltreatment? Internal procedures for seeking assistance for a child who's at risk, including referral to a school counselor, a social worker, etc. Techniques for reducing a child's risk, as well as community organizations with relevant existing research-based programs that are available to students and staff. The legislature did not forget that cybersecurity is also important in addition to our physical facilities, etc. And so online safety and security was addressed in Senate Bill 820 by what? Creating a policy. TASB Policy Services is always busy following a legislative session. This time around, I think they're probably overwhelmed. This bill is effective September 1st, 2019. It adds a new provision to Chapter 11 of the code and says each district must adopt a cybersecurity policy to secure district cyber infrastructure against cyber attacks and other cybersecurity incidents, as well as to determine cybersecurity risk and implement mitigation planning. There's also a new designation under Senate Bill 820. This requires the designation of a cybersecurity coordinator by the superintendent. Sorry if you're the director of technology, this is probably going to fall in your lap. The responsibilities of the cybersecurity coordinator are to be a liaison between the district and TEA with regards to cybersecurity matters. This individual will be responsible for sending TEA reports of any cyber attack or other incident against the district's cyber infrastructure that constitutes a breach of the system, as well as providing notice to a parent of a student enrolled in the district of an attack or incident involving the student's information. Senate Bill 11 addresses cyberbullying and says the State Board of Education, by rule, must now require each district to incorporate instruction in digital citizenship into the district's curriculum, including information regarding potential criminal consequences of cyberbullying. And there's definitions specifically provided for cyberbullying as well as digital citizenship in Senate Bill 11. Moving on from policy and training, although there's some additional policy and training requirements that we'll talk about, there was a big focus as well on law enforcement with regards to school safety and what is law enforcement's role in our schools. So first off, this is a typo that should be House Bill 1387. A little bit of dyslexia kicked in there. With regards to number of school marshals. Previously, there was a cap on the number of school marshals. This bill eliminates the cap and allows the Board of Trustees of a school district as well as the governing body of a private school to appoint one or more school marshals per campus. Previously, the maximum was the greater of either one marshal per 200 students in average daily attendance, or for each campus, one per building of the campus at which students regularly receive classroom instruction. The goal was to provide an additional option for preventing shooters, provide faster response time in shooting emergencies, and to dissuade shooters from an increased presence. The role of the school marshals has remained unchanged and does not, Senate Bill 11 did not reduce the very stringent training requirements for school marshals. The role of school marshals is limited by statute. It's strictly limited to the prevention of homicide or serious bodily injury on school premises. This applies beginning also with this coming school year, 1920. Senate Bill 1707 is already effective, went into effect on June 2nd. A little bit of the background, the author's statement of intent for Senate Bill 1707 said, as the threat of violent incidents on campus has come to the forefront, many schools choose to utilize one of several types of security personnel to keep their students safe. Current law provides school districts the ability to commission their own peace officers, enter into an MOU with local law enforcement to place officers in school, or hire other security personnel. However, there's little clarity about what these officers are required to do outside of emergency situations, and they often wind up participating in routine disciplinary procedures, a practice that tends to escalate such encounters unnecessarily. The author stated this practice is especially dangerous for students of color and students with special needs, who are most likely to be targeted for an intervention by a school law enforcement officer. And so Senate Bill 1707 attempts to clarify the duties of on-campus law enforcement, which specifically do not include routine discipline enforcement. Senate Bill 1707 authorizes the board of a district and the governing body of the Texas School of the Deaf to enter into an MOU with the local law enforcement agency, or SROs. We already had the ability to do that, so that's really nothing new. What's new, though, is now the duties of SROs are specifically outlined, and they must include protecting the safety and welfare of any person in the jurisdiction of the peace officer, SRO, or security personnel and the property of the school district. They may not assign or require routine student discipline or school administrative tasks and contact the student unrelated to the specifically statutorily prescribed duties. Informal conduct permissible is that as long as it's unrelated to the assigned duties of the officer or an incident involving student behavior or law enforcement. What are the specific statutory duties? When determining the duties, the board has to coordinate with district campus behavior coordinators and other district employees to ensure the officers and security personnel are only tasked with duties related to law enforcement intervention and specifically not with behavior or administrative duties that are, quote, better addressed by other district employees. The duties must be included in the district improvement plan, in the student code of conduct, any MOU that's providing for an SRO, as well as any other campus or district document, there's the catch-all, describing the role of peace officers, SROs, etc. There's a new training and policy. I told you there was more training and policy to come for school district peace officers as well as SROs. Previously, the requirement was only applicable to districts who had an enrollment of 30,000 students or more. Now it's all districts with school peace officers or SROs are now required to adopt a policy requiring completion of the TCOL requirements for these individuals, which must include at least 16 hours of training. Senate Bill 2135 involves arrested students. The existing requirements provide that local law enforcement must provide the superintendent with an oral and written notice upon a student's arrest for certain offenses. And that the statute provides that the superintendent must have enough information, must be provided with enough information so that he or she can determine whether there's a reasonable belief that the student committed a felony. This requires all pertinent details of the conduct, including any behavior that constituted assault or any other violence with weapons. The provision in the Education Code allows for the removal of a student to a disciplinary alternative education program if not the superintendent, the student has committed certain offenses. That'd be interesting. The superintendent got removed to the DAP. The student can get removed to a DAP if the student's continued presence in the regular classroom threatens the safety of other students or teachers or will be detrimental to the education process. Now, what's new is that the notification requirements have changed that requires both oral and written notice by a law enforcement agency upon arrest of a person who's determined to be a student. It has to contain sufficient details of the arrest or referral, as well as the acts that were allegedly committed by the student, in order to enable the superintendent or his or her designee to determine whether there's a reasonable belief that the student has engaged in conduct that's defined as a felony, or, and here's the new part, whether it's necessary to conduct a threat assessment or to prepare a safety plan that's related to the student. This bill also expands access to a student's law enforcement records. Previously, only a child's law enforcement records could be inspected or copied by a juvenile justice agency, criminal justice agency, the student, or the student's parent or guardian. Now, if a threat assessment is necessary, then and when conducting the threat assessment or preparing a safety plan for a child, superintendents, directors of open enrollment charter schools, as well as CEOs of private schools can access a student's law enforcement records. Moving on, our next topic is there's new requirements for various teams and committees. They really can be broken into two big categories with regards to school safety. First, the school safety and security committees, and then secondly, the threat assessment and safety and supportive school team. So first, the school safety and security committees under Senate Bill 11. This amends an existing provision of the code, but amends it such that it changes the composition of the committee, it increases the responsibility of the committee, how often the committees have to meet, and now subjects these committees to the Texas Open Meetings Act requirements. So first, with regards to composition, school safety and security committees must include, to the greatest extent possible, practicable, all of these individuals listed here, including the board president, a board member other than the president, the superintendent, has to include 2 parents of enrolled students, as well as the other individuals listed. Senate Bill 11 added responsibilities to these committees. Now, they have to periodically provide recommendations to the Board of Trustees as well as the district administrators regarding updating the district's multi-hazard emergency operation plan in accordance with best practices that are identified by TEA, the Texas School Safety Center, or a person included in the registry of the Texas School Safety Center. And the consultations with local law enforcement agencies now have to take place in ways to increase law enforcement presence near district campuses. With regards to frequency of the meetings, the committee has to meet at least once during each academic semester and at least once during the summer. But a committee that's established by a school district that operates school on a year-round basis or in accordance with some other alternative schedule has to meet at least 3 times during the calendar year with an interval of at least 2 months between each meeting. Now this is a brand new requirement. The school safety and security committees are now subject to the Texas Open Meetings Act, which is 551 of the Texas Government Code. They can specifically meet in executive sessions, which is important, and quite honestly, I have to wonder how much of these meetings will actually take place in open session because Section 551.076 specifically allows executive session to discuss security matters, like security personnel, devices, and all that. So for obvious reasons, you don't want to disclose what your security weaknesses are to the public in open session. And so I'll be curious to see how much of the, they'll open the meeting and then they'll probably say, and now we're going to go to closed session. And they'll go to closed session. But the notice requirements will apply, and they'll have to post agendas of the meetings at least 72 hours, like board meetings have to do as well. With regards to the threat assessment and safe and supportive school program in team, this is a brand new requirement. This adds a provision to Chapter 37 that requires TEA, in coordination with the Texas School Safety Center, to adopt rules to establish a safe and supportive school program. It also requires each board of trustees to establish a threat assessment and safe and supportive school team to serve each campus in the district. There's lots of requirements for these programs. They have to incorporate research-based best practices for school safety, including all of the things that are listed there. The board, again, we're back to policy, has to establish policies and procedures that now specifically must be consistent with the model policies that are to be developed by the Texas School Safety Center, and must include procedures where appropriate for the referral of a student to a local mental health authority or healthcare provider for evaluation or treatment, the referral for a special education evaluation, and has to allow for anonymous reporting by both students or school personnel of dangerous, violent, or unlawful activity that occurs or that's threatened to occur on school property or that relates to a student or to school personnel. This requires each team to complete training by the Texas School Safety Center or ESC regarding evidence-based threat assessment programs, and there's a reporting requirement relating to the team's activities to TEA. Who is going to be on these teams? The superintendent must ensure that members appointed to each team have experience in counseling, behavior management, mental health and substance abuse, classroom instruction, special education, school administration, school safety and security, emergency management, and law enforcement. These are not going to be small teams. These are going to be big teams. A team, thankfully, can serve more than one campus of a school district, provided each campus has to be assigned a specific team. There's an option for the superintendent to establish a committee or to assign to an existing committee the duty to oversee the operations of these teams. A committee, if this is established, this is a may, not a must, so this is an option. A committee, if one is assigned with oversight, must include members with expertise in HR, education, special ed, counseling, behavior management, school administration, mental health, and substance abuse. The list goes on and on. What are the responsibilities of these teams? The first responsibility is to conduct threat assessments under appropriate circumstances, to provide guidance to students and school employees on recognizing harmful, threatening, or violent behavior, and that has a specific definition that's included on the next slide, that may pose a threat to the community, school, or individual, and to support implementation of the district's multi-hazard EOP. The definition of harmful, threatening, or violent behavior is a pretty broad definition, and that's on purpose. That includes behaviors like verbal threats, threats of self-harm, bullying, cyberbullying, fighting, use or possession of a weapon, sexual assaults, other assaults, etc., that could result in specific interventions, ISS, out-of-school suspension, or student removal or expulsion to a DAAP or a JJAP. With regards to the committee's responsibility to perform threat assessments, the threat assessments have to include assessing and reporting individuals who make threats of violence or exhibit harmful, threatening, or violent behavior, as well as gathering and analyzing data to determine the level of risk and the appropriate intervention, which now specifically includes referring a student for mental health assessment and implementing an escalation procedure, if appropriate, that's based on the team's assessment. There are some restrictions with regards to the component relating to referral to a mental health agency. A team cannot provide a mental health care service to a student who's under 18 unless the team obtains written consent from the parent or guardian of the student before providing the mental health care service. The consent has to specifically be on a form that's developed by the district that complies with, quote, all applicable state and federal laws. Thanks for that very clear definition. Reporting obligations, there are 4: serious risk of violence, suicide risk, tobacco, drugs, and alcohol, as well as to TEA. With regards to the first reporting obligation of the threat assessment and safe and supportive school team, the team must on a determination that a student or other individual poses a serious risk of violence, either to themselves or to others, the team has to immediately report that determination to the superintendent. If the individual is a student, the superintendent then has the obligation to immediately attempt to inform the parent or the guardian of the student. And the requirements of this section don't prevent an employee of the school from acting immediately to prevent an imminent threat or to respond to an emergency. With regards to suicide risk, a team who identifies a student at risk of suicide must act in accordance with the district's suicide prevention program. And if the student at risk of suicide also makes a threat of violence to others, the team has to conduct a threat assessment in addition to the actions taken in accordance with the district's suicide prevention program. A team that identifies a student using or possessing tobacco, drugs, or alcohol shall act in accordance with district policies and procedures relating to substance use prevention and intervention. And then finally, there is a requirement to provide a detailed report to TEA concerning the team's activities. Just look at this list here. The report to the agency has to be include information for each team member, including the occupation of the team member, the number of threats and the description of the type of threats, the outcome of each assessment, including any disciplinary action taken, any action by law enforcement, or referral to mental health, special ed. The list goes on and on and on and on and on was about the reporting requirements to TEA. The next piece is multi-hazard EOPs, emergency operation plans. Senate Bill 11 amends the existing provision relating to EOPs to update the multi-hazard EOP requirements. These are applicable to both school districts as well as to junior colleges. The big piece now is that the plan has to specifically address prevention along with the existing requirements to address mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. The EOP requirements expanded the requirements for the things that must be included in the emergency operation plan, and the emphasis was added specifically for substitute teachers. And the emphasis on including substitute teachers in these school safety measures is a direct response to the Santa Fe incident because among the individuals who were injured was a former Santa Fe ISD substitute teacher who was shot twice in the legs. She testified in the House Committee hearing on Senate Bill 11 and said she was unable to lock the classroom door, which allowed the shooter to come in, and that she couldn't dial 911 from the classroom. And then another substitute teacher had to set off a fire alarm in order to alert the campus. And so that's why you're seeing this new emphasis in the EOP specifically for substitute teachers. And I won't read these to you, but just these are all new requirements for districts to have to specifically address in their EOPs. With regards to the safety and security audit, as we know, these are required at least once every three years. Now, to the extent possible, they have to adhere to the safety and security audit procedures that are developed by the Texas School Safety Center or developed by a person who is registered by the Texas School Safety Center. An additional requirement is going to be that in the audit report, the district has to certify that the district used the funds provided to it through the school safety allotment only for purposes provided by that section, which is what we went through in the beginning. Additionally, the results must be reported to the board and the Texas School Safety Center. And the report, and this is new, now has to be signed by the district's board of trustees and the superintendent, or if it's a junior college, the president and the board. There's now a new provision relating to a public hearing on noncompliance. If a district, upon receiving notice of noncompliance, they have to have a public hearing to notify the public of the district's failure to submit or correct deficiencies in their EOP, or to report the results of a safety and security audit to the Texas School Safety Center. as well as the dates of noncompliance, and they're going to specifically call out the board here, the names of each board member and the superintendent during the period of noncompliance. The information that's listed has to be provided to every person who attends the hearing. It must provide members of the public a reasonable opportunity to appear before the board and speak on the issue that's a true public hearing, as well as the district has to provide written confirmation to the Texas School Safety Center that the hearing was held. Upon notice from the Texas School Safety Center of the district's failure to submit an EOP, the commissioner is now authorized to appoint a conservator for the district, as well as to appoint a board of managers. The legislature is very serious about updating these EOP plans and what the board's role is in providing for these plans. Appointing a conservator or a board of managers is a big, big, big deal. And so they clearly want to get specifically the attention of the Board of Trustees with regards to these updates. And the Senate Bill 11 also amends an existing provision of Chapter 37. This is only applicable to school districts and states that in addition to a review of the EOP, the Texas School Safety Center may require a district to submit its plans for immediate review if the district's audit results indicate that the district is not complying with applicable standards. The center also has to establish a random or need-based cycle for its review and verification of school district EOPs. And the cycle has to provide for each district's plan to be reviewed at regular intervals as determined by the center. And a school district or junior college must submit its EOP plan to the center on request of the center and in accordance with the review cycle that's going to be established. With regards to the review and verification of the EOP, as part of the review, the Texas School Safety Center must verify that the district's plan meets the requirements that are outlined in the statute, or provide the district with written notice of how the plan is deficient, and stating that the district must correct the deficiencies and then resubmit the plan to the center for review. If a district fails to submit the EOP to the center for review, the center must provide the district with written notice, stating that they have failed to submit a plan and requiring resubmission of the plan. The center may approve a district EOP that has deficiencies as long as the district submits a revised plan that the center determines will correct the deficiencies that were found. If 3 months after the date of initial notification of a plan's deficiencies or a failure to submit a plan, the district has not corrected the plan or has still not submitted a plan, the center has to provide written notice to the district and to TEA of the district's failure, and it requires that they comply immediately. If the district still hasn't corrected the plan or has failed to submit the plan 6 months after the date of initial notification, the center has to provide written notice to the district, stating that the district has to hold one of those public hearings that we talked about. If the district fails to submit a plan, the notice has to state that the commissioner is authorized to appoint a conservator, like we talked about earlier. Our next topic is a big one, and it was a big focus, and a lot of people thought it was applauded the legislature for making mental health such a big focus of school safety, as opposed to solely concentrating on putting more law enforcement or more physical measures into place in the district. And so there's lots of mental health bills to go through. Governor Abbott specifically stated, of course in a tweet, that's how we communicate these days, mental health is a school safety priority for Texas lawmakers. And so there's really 3 big components that the legislature focused on: mental health resources, the creation of a mental health consortium, and of course training and instruction. Senate Bill 11 has a curriculum and instruction component and states that each district that offers K-12 instruction must offer an enrichment curriculum that includes mental health as well as suicide prevention. Senate Bill 11 requires TEA no later than December 1st of this year ESCs and identifying resources related to student mental health that are available to schools in their respective regions. TEA is required to develop a rubric in conjunction with all of these agencies who you see there. TEA's rubric must provide for the identification of resources relating to training and technical assistance on practices that support the mental health of students, school-based programs that provide prevention or intervention services, community-based programs, communities and schools is specifically identified in the statute, school-based mental health providers, as well as public and private funding sources that are available to address the mental health of students. TEA is required no later than December 1st of each odd number year to revise and update this rubric as necessary and provide that to each ESC. This is a new provision. This requires each USC to use the rubric developed by TEA to identify resources related to student mental health available to schools in that center, in that ESC specific region, including evidence-based and promising programs and best practices that address the things there. Creating a school environment that supports the social, emotional, and academic development of students, identification of students who may need these services, providing early and effective interventions, etc. This also requires TEA, in addition to that local list that each ESC is going to develop, TEA is going to be required to develop a list of statewide resources that are available to districts to address the mental health of students, including training and technical assistance, etc. With regard to mental health resources, TEA is required to develop a statewide plan to ensure that all students have access to adequate mental health resources. That's a lofty endeavor. TEA is also required to use the statewide plan for student mental health to develop and revise TEA's long-term strategic plan. And TEA is required to report to the legislature a description of any changes that TEA has made to the rubric that it's required to develop, as well as an analysis of each region's progress toward meeting TEA's goals that are developed with regards to each specific ESC's ability, or responsibility rather, to make a rubric for a specific ESC region. Senate Bill 11 also establishes the Texas Child Mental Health Consortium. This is supposed to utilize the expertise and capacity of health-related institutions of higher ed within the consortium to address urgent mental health challenges and improve the state's mental health care system for children and adolescents, as well as enhance the state's ability to address mental health care needs. The composition of the consortium, specifically by name, calls out 13 health-related institutions of higher ed. It's the ones that you would think of: Baylor College of Medicine, A&M Health Science Center, MD Anderson, UT Medical Branch at Galveston, etc. HSSC, the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, 3 nonprofits that are focused on mental health care, as well as any other entity that's deemed necessary by the executive committee of the consortium. With regards to access to care, the Child Psychiatry Access Network and Telemedicine and Telehealth Programs bill is new. This requires the consortium to establish a network of comprehensive child psychiatry access centers. Each center is required to be located at a health-related institution of higher ed, one of the 13 that are listed, and provide consultation services and training opportunities for pediatricians and primary care providers operating in that geographic area. The consortium is required to establish or expand telemedicine or telehealth programs for identifying and assessing behavioral health needs, as well as providing mental health care services. A health-related institution of higher ed that's listed in the statute is authorized to enter into an MOU with a community health care provider in order to establish the center that's required, or to expand or establish a telemedicine or telehealth program as well. The consortium is required to leverage the resources of the hospital system in order to provide those consultation services and the telemedicine services. With regards to consent, you may provide mental health care services to a child younger than 18 through a program that's established by the consortium only with the written consent of a parent or legal guardian of the child. The consortium has to develop and post on its website a model form in order to have this consent. Importantly, this section does not apply to services that are provided by a school counselor in accordance with the school counseling section of the Education Code. What about mental health in public schools? House Bill 18, which is effective December 31st of this year, has some key definitions, including mental health condition, as well as substance abuse. Those are listed there. And they have continuing education requirements for several groups of people. The first one is for teachers, and this amends an existing provision of Chapter 21 and says continuing education requirements for classroom teachers must now include instruction regarding educating diverse student populations, including special education students, and how mental health conditions, including grief and trauma, affect student learning behavior, and how evidence-based, grief-informed, and trauma-informed strategies support the academic success of students who are affected by grief or by trauma. The second category of CE requirements relates to principals. It's very similar to that of students. And then finally, for counselors, there's a continuing ed requirement that now has to include instruction regarding counseling students concerning mental health or substance abuse conditions, and the effective implementation of a comprehensive school counseling program that already exists under the code. Staff development training for educators now. Staff development training has to specifically include training on suicide prevention, recognizing signs of mental health conditions and substance abuse, strategies for establishing and maintaining positive relationships among students, including conflict resolution. I could probably attend that one. How grief and trauma affect student learning and behavior, and how certain strategies support the academic success of students, and preventing, identifying, responding to, and reporting incidents of bullying. The training has to use a best practice program that's recommended by HHS. With regards to the comprehensive school counseling program, this amends an existing provision to require a school counselor to work in collaboration with faculty, staff, students, and parents to plan, implement, and evaluate a, quote, comprehensive school counseling program that conforms to the most recent edition of the Texas Model for Comprehensive School Counseling Programs that's developed by the Texas Counseling Association. Before implementing the program, an annual preview of the program for parents and guardians is required. There's a big focus on making information available, and so House Bill 18 requires each district to publish additional information both in the student handbook as well as on the district's website, a statement of the policies and procedures that are adopted to promote the physical health and mental health of students, physical health and mental health resources, as well as contact information for the nearest providers of essential health services, the contact information for the nearest local mental health authority, and for each campus in the district, a statement on whether the campus has a full-time nurse or a full-time school counselor. So those are new posting requirements, again, for this handbook as well as on the website. There's also new curriculum requirements. This requires each district who serves K-12 students to include enrichment curriculum that addresses mental health, including instruction about mental health conditions, substance abuse, skills to manage emotions, establishing and maintaining positive relationship, and responsible decision making. This is an identical provision. If you're saying this sounds familiar, it's because this is also included in Senate Bill 11. The State Board of Education is required to adopt TEKS that address science, risk factors, causes, dangers, consequences, signs, symptoms, and treatment of substance abuse, including the use of illegal drugs, abuse of prescription drugs, alcohol, etc. With regards to contracting authority, districts are now allowed to employ or contract with one or more, quote, non-physician mental health professionals, which are those that are listed there. With regards to school-based health centers, previously, only on the recommendation of a SHAC, a school-based health advisory council, could a district establish a school-based health center at one or more campuses. Now that's expanded because it can now come, it still can come from the SHAC, but now the Board of Trustees of the school district or an open enrollment charter school can also decide to establish a school-based health center. The permissible categories of services to be provided at school-based health centers are also expanded now to include treatment for mental health conditions as well as treatment for substance abuse. House Bill 18 amends a provision relating to mental health referral for services. If it's determined that a student is in need of a referral for physical health services or mental health services, the staff of the school-based health center must notify the person whose consent is required verbally, which is the parent or guardian, verbally and in writing on the basis for the referral. The referral may not be provided unless the person provides written consent for the type of service to be provided and specific written consent for each treatment occasion or for a course of treatment that includes multiple treatment occasions. Okay, we're in the home stretch. I know this is a really dry topic. For just miscellaneous bills, Senate Bill 11 adds a provision of the Texas Education Code to specifically now require parental notification of a bomb threat or terroristic threat relating to a campus or other district facility at which students are present as soon as possible. With regards to emergency evacuation and mandatory school drills, this requires the commissioner in consultation with the state fire marshal and the Texas School Safety Center to adopt rules providing for procedures for evaluating and securing school property during an emergency, and also, this one's new, designating the number of mandatory school drills per semester. Beginning with this school year, with the 1920 school year, a school district or charter school cannot prohibit a licensed handgun carrier from transporting or storing a handgun, firearm, or ammunition in a locked private car in a parking area that's provided by the district. And this one's the part that's new, may not regulate the manner in which the firearm or ammunition is stored in the vehicle, so long as it's not in plain view. The concern that was sought to be addressed by this bill was that some districts were implementing additional regulations related to storage of firearms and ammunition in locked vehicles. And this is making clear that we cannot do that. The Texas School Safety Center Board of Directors, new requirements now must include a professional architect, as well as 3 members of the public. Formerly, it was only 2 members of the public. And the members are appointed by the governor with appointment subject to confirmation by the Senate. Senate Bill 435 addresses opioid addiction and abuse by amending an existing provision of the code to state duties of a local SHAC now include recommending appropriate curriculum for instruction regarding opioid addiction and abuse, as well as method of administering an opioid antagonist. You'll recall a couple of sessions ago, there was a big focus on concussions, specifically related to football, of course, and they created these concussion oversight teams. School nurses were not happy because they were not allowed to be on these teams. Now, this Senate House Bill 961 fixes that, and a school nurse may serve on a concussion oversight team at his or her request. The nurse must complete the training course that's required at least every 2 years in order to serve on the team. House Bill 496 is effective already. It was effective as of June 15th and adds a provision to Chapter 38. And it's a 2-part requirement, the Traumatic Injury Response Protocol and bleeding control stations. With regards to the traumatic injury response protocol, each district and charter school has to develop and annually make available protocol for employees as well as volunteers to follow in the event of a traumatic injury that addresses all of the things that are listed there, including requiring a bleeding control station. The bleeding control station, with regards to location, they have to be chosen by the school safety and security committee, must be easily accessible, and may be the location where automatic external defibrillators are stored. There's required components for these stations, including all of the things that are listed there. These kits will now have to include these, and then there's optional components as well. Now that was a lot of information and not a very fun topic, but hopefully you found it interesting. And again, with regard to the majority of these bills, they're either already in effect or they will be in effect for the 1920 school year. So Texas School Safety Center, TEA, SBOE, TASB Policy Services, all of you guys at the districts, including superintendents or the board, now have a lot of new requirements to address school safety. So with that, thank you so much for having me. I hope your remaining topics are much more lighter than this one. Thanks, you guys.
Let's take about a 5-minute break and then we'll come back to it. Yes. Yeah. Sure.
No, your account is not locked.
What's going on?
Let's see.
Kendra, dude.
Somebody left a cherry coke over here. Oh, I was gonna say. Yeah, somebody better grab it. I might get some sales sheets.
Activate, yeah. Yeah, because just because it's a license. If it's not licensed, you lose something. Yeah. So it should be good.
Because Head Start, they know, but they pretend like, oh, really, like this is something. It's like a little way. Yeah, I know. They just ain't something that I learned. She received a message from them. On their right now. You know, I need my other. I know. I know how it is.
It might even be like taking people's it's not
Usually working meetings, other meetings. That's
What's up?
Bye, see you later.
That sounds like we should just kiss you.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Our next session deals with investing and Sears, and this was a presentation over a year ago.
Yep, last year.
Yeah, and it's still a fairly new program here in Texas, and I think it's a good tool that a lot of districts will be able to utilize regarding investment in CDs and TDRs, and there's some requirements. So I asked Chris to come in and come talk to us, and he's gonna introduce Melody to
Yes.
this one.
Yep, thank you. So I'm Chris Ely from Promontory Interfinancial Network. I'm based in Sugar Land, so just not too far from here. And like Jesus said, I did do a similar presentation here last year, so hopefully a few of you are repeat customers to that degree. I'm also joined by Melody Hess, who is VP. Is this okay?
Yeah, I forgot to mention, the Nearpod code is YBAL, or if you want to follow on your phone or your iPad, YBAL. I also just sent an email with the PowerPoint for the legislative update, and also for this one as well. They should be in your email. The one for Sarah was pretty large. It was like about almost 9 megabytes, so I don't know if you'll get it, but it is also a Nearpod as well. In the same email, you'll have the code for Nearpod that's available. You can download it and share it with whoever it is. So thank you, and then that's the code.
Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, I'm joined by Melody Hess, who is Vice President and Business Development Officer at New First National Bank. They're local, about $700 million bank. They've been longtime partners of Promontory Interfinancial Network. So when I did this last year, it was basically just my partner and I speaking, but I thought it would be really impactful to hear about the programs we're going to discuss from not just my perspective, but also from a banker's perspective as well. So once I've done my piece, I'm going to hand it over to Melody towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today are, we're going to start with the challenges that financial officers are facing currently. I know that there's always pressure to do more with less. We'll go into some other things along those lines. Also, we'll cover just very briefly typical cash management options. We're talking about traditional CDs and deposits at banks. We're talking about collateralized deposits, repurchase agreements, T-bills, notes, bonds, those type of things. Then we're going to get into really the meat and potatoes of the presentation, which are the FDIC insured cash management solutions. And these are solutions that my company, Promontory Network, provides. So these are the CEDARS program, which, if just a little participation, have you all heard of CEDARS before? Just how many? Okay, yep, okay, quite a few of you, that's great. We also have a sister program, which is basically very similar. It's just, instead of CD placements, it's just non-maturity account placements. That's called Insured Cash Sweep. So we'll talk about those. That's really the crux of the conversation. We'll go through a couple examples about how government entities can use these programs, what else you need to know, and then my favorite part of the presentation when Melody comes in and talks about from a banker's perspective. So let's lay the economic landscape today, and this is going to be pretty high level. I'm not going to go into sort of the more macroeconomic things because so much is up in the air. I spend most of my time talking to banks, and there's great debate about whether interest rates are going to remain stable, whether or not they're going to fall. And just a year ago, we were talking about how high are they going to go. So it's a really dynamic, changing environment right now. We're going to leave that aside, but we're going to talk about a couple things here. One thing I want you to look at is the 2018 Association of Financial Professionals survey. This is conducted every year. Last year, the question was asked to financial professionals what their primary short-term cash management objective is. The vast majority of that group, 65%, say it's safety. We want to make sure our funds are fully protected, that we're not going to lose our hard-earned tax dollars. That's where it should be. I mean, things go awry when that number starts coming down too much. You definitely want that to be at the forefront of people's minds, particularly when public money and taxpayer dollars are involved. It needs to be protected. We can't lose this money. So this is going to tie into the rest of the presentation, but sort of the second thing that professionals cited was liquidity. And that's really, these numbers are not an anomaly to 2018. It's been very similar ratios going years back because there just isn't enough yield going out longer right now to really incentivize customers to tie up their funds in a term product usually. So 30% cited liquidity. What's most telling is only 4% cited yield. So yield is certainly important. It's what the discussion with your banker is very often about, but only 4% of financial professionals cited that as the primary objective. And I think that's actually a good thing. Yield should be considered, certainly, but you want to make sure your funds are protected first and foremost. Then additionally, only 20% of respondents said that commercial paper and just traditional uninsured above the standard insurance limits bank deposits would increase. So this is saying on the commercial side, commercial paper is a bit riskier, so most professionals are not going to dig down more into that. And then bank deposits, if you've already maxed out the $250,000 FDIC insurance limit capacity, you're not going to plan to increase that much more. At least 80% are not planning to. So that just gives a broad perspective that financial stability is still top of mind. Also from the bank's perspective, there was monumental legislative change last year, at the end of May last year, so it's been well over a year now. There was a bill, Senate Bill 2155, that was signed into law. It's called the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act. And what that did for community banks is it rolled back some of the very, very strict regulatory pressures that was put on them. We actually, my company, Promontory, we conducted our own survey and asked the bankers that we work with to rank sort of on a scale 1 to 5, how positive was the effect of each individual piece of that bill. And we saw at the very top end of the scale, ranked above 4 out of 5, was the change in reciprocal deposits. And I assume probably most of you aren't familiar with what reciprocal deposits are. That's okay. They're basically what on a bank's balance sheet the CDERS and ICS program are. So there's a certain type of funding that banks have to report. It's called a reciprocal deposit. That's what they get when they do CDERS and ICS program. So what this did, rolling back the tight regulations that were on reciprocal deposits, is it made reciprocal deposit programs more beneficial for banks. So if it's more beneficial for the bank, obviously they want more depositors using that. So that's where it sort of matters to you. You're going to see more benefit now of using these programs because the banks that you work with want you to use it more because regulatory-wise, it looks better to them. So what additional challenges do you face? With budgets always getting tighter, you're always expected to do more with less every year, every quarter, every month. We get just the cycle, that's the natural pressure of the system. You also have to manage your intermittent cash flows. This is nothing different from every year, but I just say we understand sort of the things that you're looking at. There have been changes over the years to money market mutual fund regulations that have probably caused some heartache in understanding how to utilize those. And then also there have been financial institution regulations related to bank capital requirements that this is pertaining to liquidity coverage ratio that the biggest banks in the country have been impacted with over the past several years. It's been a number of years now. Basically what this does, without getting too much into the weeds, is the biggest of banks out there have runoff ratios based on the type of deposit that they have on their books. And public fund money was given a 40% runoff ratio, which is impactful for big banks. And this is a regulation that does not apply to banks, community banks. So the big banks are impacted by this. The community banks are not impacted by this. And what that has done over the years is we've seen public fund money go from the biggest institutions straight out and flow into the community banks. So perhaps you've seen that impact, perhaps not, but this is something on the bank regulatory side that we have seen over the years. So what are the guidelines to maximize returns and minimize risk? That's what probably everyone's financial guidelines are. Also to preserve adequate liquidity, like we talked about, that 30%, going back to the survey, said liquidity was very, very important. Also to have funds fully protected. Most states require that. Texas is certainly no different. Funds need to be protected in some way. Collateral, FDIC insurance in some capacity. There also may be statutes, requirements, or just preferences to try to keep the money that's invested local. And I think this is something maybe that gets passed over a little bit too quickly sometimes. And it's just the benefit of banking with a community bank and what they do. So if you use a really, really big institution, a national bank, you deposit your funds with that institution, they're going to lend out and use that money who knows where. It could be anywhere in the country to fund really, really big projects. When you bank with a community bank, they are invested in the community. They're here in Texas, they're here in Houston. They're going to take your deposit and they're going to lend it out to someone who's trying to start a business, or a family who's trying to buy a home, or a school that's trying to build a new building. These are the things that you can be sure your money is going, your hard-earned money is going towards a good cause when you use an institution that's invested locally. So let's talk about a few examples of typical cash management options. I'm not going to, this isn't the main part I'm here to talk about, so I'm going to go through these kind of quickly, but I just want to look at some of the pros and cons of some really typical options. First are traditional CD placements. So the benefit here is that they earn interest above what you would in just a traditional savings account at a bank. The reason for that is because it's locked in for a term. So if you're going to give a bank 1 year money, they know that they can rely on that deposit being in the bank for a year. That's more valuable to them. Therefore, they will pay a higher interest rate for that. So that's the primary pro. The con of traditional CDs at a bank is when you have a large portfolio of funds that you're trying to manage, you're only protected by the FDIC insurance coverage up to $250,000 per institution. So really, the level of safety there only applies up to $250,000. Above that, if the bank fails, you would run the risk of losing any deposit above that. Furthermore, with any CD, there are withdrawal restrictions. So, obviously you want to keep the money there for the entire duration. If you do need to withdraw the funds, there's usually pretty hefty penalties to do that. So you don't really satisfy that liquidity requirement to the fullest extent. You also have bonds, notes, and treasury bills. And this is a pretty simple one. They're very safe, but they don't yield very much. So you are satisfying that main requirement of keeping your funds protected, but you're probably leaving some yield on the table. You could be doing something else that would earn you a bit more for a similar risk profile. Approved government investment pools. These are funded primarily by short-term paper and cash. The pools are liquid, so you do have access to your funds. But a big downside here that's often missed is the funds may not remain local. So there's not so much the community bank is benefiting from when you use these investment pools. And don't forget too, there is some market risk involved. So most financial professionals are comfortable using these investment pools. They're relatively safe. I'm not saying anything terrible is going to happen in the near term, but just be aware there is a level of risk there. Some of these pools have defaulted before, so don't have a blind eye to that. It's just something that you have to factor in and be conscious of. Repo agreements and collateralized deposits do provide a level of security. They do earn interest, although the interest that you're being offered by the bank can vary depending on sort of their balance sheet and how actively they want to pursue collateralized deposits. And repurchase agreements do offer unlimited withdrawals usually. So the cons list is much more lengthy than all the other examples. So the resources needed to track the mark-to-market changing collateral values is quite high. This is a time-consuming financial product to use. It's not only time-consuming for the end depositor, but also for the banks and bankers that have to administer the collateralized deposits. I spend, like I said, most of my time speaking with bankers, and they don't want to do collateralized deposits. It's too time-consuming. It ties up their balance sheet, so the monies that they have pledged for that deposit means they can't lend that out. They can't fund a loan, so that's costly for them. They don't want to do that. There's also risk potential here as well due to changing value of the pledged collateral. So you have to stay on top of that. You have to mark-to-market that value and make sure you don't get on the bad end of that and potentially lose your funds. There's also an issue on reliance on issuer's credit, sort of self-explanatory, and you may have to include these collateralized deposits in footnotes. So again, this is all tying up to just the hassle of having to do collateralized deposits. You may also be limiting yourself to the number of banks that you can work with, because some banks won't do collateralized deposits at all. They don't want to get into that business. They don't have a balance sheet that can really support that. So you're limiting the pool of banks that you can work with, and collateralized deposits typically daily withdrawal limit. So let's talk about the other options that are available. FDIC insured cash management options. I'm going to go through the pros and cons first, and then we're going to dig down deeper into some more detail. But the CDARS program, which has been around since 2002 and has grown to tens of billions of dollars, 1/3 of that money are public fund depositors. So it's a very well-known, widely used program. And CDARS stands for Certificate of Deposit Account Registry Service. Basically what this is it's a multi-million-dollar FDIC-insured CD. So you can go into one bank that offers the CDARS program and access up to $50 million in FDIC coverage on a CD placement. So that's pretty powerful when you're managing a large book. And the $250,000 that you would normally get doesn't go very far. So we'll talk about how that expanded insurance is provided and how we go about doing that. Also earns interest. The interest that you earn through the CDARS program is determined by the bank that you're working with. So they are fully autonomous in setting the interest rate that they want to offer a CDARS program customer. Promontory is not setting that rate. Also enables users to forego the hassle and the requirement of tracking market-to-market collateral. Because this entire placement is fully backed by FDIC insurance coverage, there's no need to go through the collateralization process. So that saves you time, and all the points that I already mentioned. As with any CD though, you are locked in for a duration. CDARS does have early withdrawals, but the penalties are pretty stiff. The short end of the maturities, the 1 month and the 3 month, you're going to pay 100% of the interest that you would have accrued on that as the early withdrawal penalty. Any tenures longer than that, you pay 50% of the interest that would have accrued. So they're stiff because this is not a program you want to use for intermittent cash flows. This is when you know that you can lock in funds for that set period of time. A sister program to CDARS, which is ironic. This program is actually twice the size as far as volume, twice as many deposits in this program as there is in CDARS, but not as widely known for whatever reason. CDARS came first. That was sort of our flagship product and program in 2002. And it wasn't until 2010 when we opened up Insured Cash Sweep. Basically what it is the same thing as CDARS. It's just a liquid version of that. So accounts are formed in either a DDA account or an MMDA account at your bank. And this one affords you $160 million of FDIC insurance coverage. So that means you can go into a local bank like New First Bank, and they're a $700 million bank. They can give you access to $160 million of FDIC insurance coverage through this program. So that's quite powerful. And think about how much time savings and efficiency that could add to your day-to-day business if you can consolidate a number of banking relationships into working with one community bank that you know, you trust, you like the banker. That could be such a valuable product for the bank to sell because they get a larger portion of your relationship, but it's also a benefit to you because you can sort of focus your attention on certain bankers that know your needs and wants and that you work well with, versus trying to spread your relationship among a bunch of different banks. Yes, question?
How long is the sweep?
How long is it? It's an overnight sweep.
Overnight?
Yep, overnight sweep. So if you want something that's locked in, you would use CDARS, but if you want something that's available on a day's notice, that's what the Insured Cash Sweep program accomplishes. So sister programs, most banks offer both. A lot of customers will utilize both. So pretty powerful tool. So the interest that you earn here, just like CDARS, is set by the bank that you're working with. Again, they're fully autonomous to set the rate that they want to offer for your funds. But keep in mind, the more money you bring to a bank, the more valuable customer you're going to be. Typically, the more they're going to be willing to pay you because they value that relationship even more so than smaller relationship. That's just the way it is. But the bank set the interest. You don't have to do the collateralization because it's fully insured. You're not subject to floating any fee values, liquidity fees, money market mutual fund redemption gates. You can, maybe you're not involved in that or worrying about those things right now. If you're not, great, but if you are, you can sweep all that to the side and make your life a lot simpler by using a bank that offers this program. Also, as Jesus was asking, also provides access to your funds. You have access to these funds daily, very similar to the way you would if it was just a traditional NMDA or DDA account there at the bank. The cons, the main one that I can think of is that the staff might not be familiar. And when I say staff, I'm talking about the end depositor and also the bank staff. So many end depositors, even though we're approaching $90 billion in depositor money in these programs, a lot of times end depositors still don't know this exists. That's why I'm here and why I do these things. So they don't know to ask for it. And some of the banks that I work with, they say, you know, we don't have customers asking for this program. And I say that's because they don't know it exists. You have to tell them it exists. So that's one problem sometimes that we have. Also on the bank side, we partner with, so Promontory partners with over 3,000 banks, bank charters. There's only 5,000 some bank charters in the country, so that's well over half of the banks have these programs. But the person that you talk to at the bank might not know that they have the program. It's typically housed in sort of a central place in the bank. There's not always every person that you talk to is going to know that it's available, but if you ask for it, you can sort of escalate that, run that up the chain. More than half the banks in the country have this, so usually the bank that you're talking to will have this program. If you're not sure, you can also just ask me. So the staff might not be familiar.
Final question to that.
Yes.
Somebody like Chase, would they have that program?
If someone like Chase Bank, would they have this program? This program is used, there's more value proposition to community banks. So this is a network of community banks. We wouldn't say no to Chase, but we're not going out. Chase is they're not a partner of ours. We're working with probably the $100 million to, I don't know, $50 billion bank is usually more typically the type of banks that we work with. That's the vast number of banks in the country, obviously. A big bank like Chase, they're just so much size, too big to fail. They're not as active in these type of programs. Because the value is for a community bank that's $1 billion or $10 billion to be able to compete against those larger institutions. Good question. So let's just look at the graphic here and see a flow of how it works when you want to use these programs. So in this example, the depositor has $5 million that they want to place into CDs. They're going to open an account at the bank, the community bank that they want to work with that offers the Cedars program, and they will deposit the $5 million at a transaction account at the bank. Not a Cedars account, just a regular transaction account at the bank. What the bank is then going to do is move your $5 million into the Promontory network, into the Cedars program. And what Promontory does is we're going to break up that $5 million deposit into insurable tranches. So that $5 million is going to get broken up into at least 21 different CDs in increments less than $250,000. And those CDs are going out to 21 different institutions. Now, you're not opening 21 different accounts. You're not managing 21 different relationships. You are just opening the account with the single bank that you're making this placement through. You're just communicating with them. They're providing you all your reporting, all your statements. You just manage that one relationship, but for the purpose of achieving multi-million-dollar FDIC insurance coverage, there will be 21 banks holding your funds. So that's what's happening sort of behind the scenes. That's what makes it possible. What happens after that placement is where the reciprocal deposit comes into play. Now, this doesn't matter so much. You don't see so much of this on your end. This is educational, so I want you to understand sort of what the bank sees. They are going to get, because they don't want to lose the $5 million that you just brought in and send it to 21 different banks. They're going to get $5 million back from other banks in the network doing the exact same thing simultaneously. So the bank that you're working with says, I'm going to hold this $5 million, you guys are going to hold my $5 million, and that way everyone is fully insured. But that process of basically swapping and trading deposits, that's called a reciprocal deposit. And that's what, tying back to one of the earlier slides, a major regulatory change lifted some rules on, were reciprocal deposits. In this mix, any swap, any movement of funds moves through the Bank of New York Mellon. Again, you don't see this, you don't open an account with Bank of New York Mellon, but just be aware the largest custodian bank in the world is the custody, settlement, and record keeper for all of the customers, all of the transactions in the network, that full tens of billions of dollars of customer funds that I was talking about. That's important because in the unlikely event there is a bank that fails, remember you have 21 individual placements at 21 different banks. If one of those banks fails and there does need to be an FDIC insurance payout, Bank of New York Mellon knows where everyone's money is. They're the settlement, record keeper, and custody partner, so they file that claim for you. You don't have to do anything. That's part of the service that we and they provide. They're also very deep partners with the Promontory Network. They own a substantial portion of our company, so they're not going anywhere. Like I said, they're the largest custodial bank in the world. So a few examples, a couple examples rather. So this is what it would look like for an ICS transaction, Insured Cash Sweep. Remember, this is the liquid version. Customer has $10 million. They're going to deposit that $10 million at a transaction account at the bank. They determine with their banker they want to keep $200,000 just in a regular transaction account at the bank because the bank has its own $250,000 of FDIC coverage that they can offer you. But they want to sweep the remaining $9.8 million into the ICS program so that it's the whole $10 million is fully insured. Very similar procedures, place the $10 million in, carve out the portion you want to keep at the bank, then they're going to initiate that transaction. The bank is going to initiate that transaction for you. It's going to move out into network banks, and then depending on whether you have an MMDA account or a DDA account, you may have unlimited withdrawals or you may have a 6 withdrawal per month limitation. That's for you and the bank to determine how you want to set that up. But it's pretty simple. That's the flow of funds. For public deposits in Texas, public deposits are approved to use these programs, both the SECURES program and the ICS program. And in fact, the way the legislation is written in Texas, this is even one of the more friendly states for these type of programs. So rest assured you can use these. So what does this mean? Like I said, public funds are allowed to use these programs. So government entities have access to FDIC insurance of large deposits through a single bank relationship. And I know we're mainly talking about public fund deposits here, but there are hardly any restrictions on the type of depositor that can use these programs. We have lots of money from just wealthy individuals, businesses, corporations, HOAs, churches, hospitals, I mean, you name it. Any portfolio that has a large multi-million-dollar balance, we see in these programs. But a full third of it is from public fund money. ICF, or Insured Reciprocal Deposit Sweep and term deposits will minimize the need for collateralization. I've already mentioned that a few times, so I won't belabor that. and besides providing access to multi-million-dollar insurance coverage, reciprocal deposit sweep and term deposit services allow banks to repurpose collateral, sort of a long bullet, thereby reducing collateral tracking burdens and associated costs. So, like I said a couple times before, the banks want to do this typically. This is a more valuable deposit for the bank, so they're going to pass on some of that benefit to you in terms of the rate that they're willing to offer. In this example, county government has $15 million to invest. They want to keep the money secure, intermittent cash flow needs, so the government finance officer uses competitive bidding process to obtain rates from several banks. Several banks are going to offer this program, so you can keep that as a consideration. The bid is won by a local bank that offers ICS and CDERs, so it's a bank that's going to be able to offer them both CDs and liquid accounts fully insured. The bank places $12 million of the county's funds using ICS to meet that liquidity need, and the remaining $3 million they've determined to place into CD placements. And you don't have to place the whole $3 million into one single maturity term. You can also ladder it out just like you would a normal CD, so that you have money coming due more regularly, so you have more overall liquidity. So in this example, they placed $1 million in a 1-year CDER CD, $1 million in a 2-year CDER CD, $1 million in a 3-year CDER CD, so that they'll have $1 million come due each year. Second example, school district had historically collateralized all of its deposits at a local bank with treasuries and bonds. As a result, the school district was responsible for continuing to monitor whether the pledged assets maintain sufficient value to cover the full value of the relationship. Obviously, I feel like I've said it 10 times already, but you don't have to go through that process anymore. Once the school board approved the use of ICS and CDERs, funds were deposited at a local bank using CDERs for longer term and ICS for shorter term. You'll get this presentation after, so just some maybe you want to take home for reading here. I don't want to go spend too much time on these. So your selection criteria. I'm using the terminology CDERs and ICS, but we're not the only provider of services like this. There's a small handful, maybe maximum half a dozen other companies with their own similar proprietary products that will accomplish multi-million-dollar FDIC insurance coverage. So if you're not going with the CDERs ICS bank, do take into account doing your due diligence. So the organizational stability, the company's reputation, financial stability, quality, thought leadership, blah, blah, blah. Our founders remain on our board of directors still today. These are the people who invented the reciprocal deposit. We were the first to market this. We hold 20 patents on our technology. And every single one of them are former high-ranking regulators. And by high-ranking, I mean former vice chair of the Federal Reserve, former comptroller of the U.S. currency, former chief of staff of the OCC and FDIC. These are very, very high-ranking Washington regulators that came together, saw a need for community banks to have a better way to compete for large depositors, and they created our company. So take that into consideration when you do your due diligence. The confidentiality, integrity, and availability, how's my information protected. With the scale of the program, this is extremely critical. These are large dollar deposits, and a lot of banks within this network doing this program. So the protection of information is extremely, extremely critical. We are examined and regulated ourselves, which is unusual for a company like us. So, they kick our tires, make sure our processes are in place, make sure information's protected. You can pull that report. The FFIEC creates that report. Then third-party independent validation. Are there industry endorsements? We're endorsed by the two Texas banking state trades, which are Texas Bankers Association, Independent Bankers Association of Texas, and also American Bankers Association. Those are the three most important banking endorsements really that you can get. We have all three. Also security assessments and audits, SOC 1 reports, these type of things, are they readily available? For us, they are. So you might want to update your RFP if it doesn't already have CEDARS and ICS included. We can help you with that, or if you know a bank that offers these programs, they can help you with that as well. But like I said, the bank's not going to offer it. It's sort of a chicken or the egg. Like, the bank's not going to offer it if you don't ask for it, and if they don't tell you they offer it, you're not going to ask for it. So a good way to get around that is just include it in your RFP. Okay, wow, this did it. Okay, so now Melody Hess, she's going to talk about the program from her perspective. Like I said, great partner of Promontory. These guys have used both the CEDARS and the ICS program for a number of years. So, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Melody Hess. I'm with New First National Bank. We are a community bank that's been around since 1902. I've not been there that long. So about 15 years is the time that I've been there. And during that time, we've enjoyed a great relationship with Promontory and our financial network. So thank you, Chris, for inviting me this morning. We have millions of dollars of client money in this program. We've used it for a long time. Our clients in the program have added more dollars. They've enjoyed both CEDARS and ICS. So I know that there are some banks across the country that may offer one or the other, but we've offered both for that time. And just to give you a little bit of information, Chris mentioned that we are about a $700 million bank. If you go to bankrate.com, we are a 5-star superior rated bank, so we know that at least you'd be dealing with a top-rated bank financially. And so I'll get started here from a couple of our customers' perspectives, what they like about the program and what we also enjoy about CEDARS. We use the program primarily to keep our clients' deposits insured. We do have a lot of large depositors, some of them municipalities, some HOAs, some corporations where $250,000 insurance is not nearly enough. And that's primarily why we use the program. Rate is important to some, but it's the insurance aspect of it. Benefits to the customer, this may be a little repetitive with what Chris has already shared this morning. But of course the deposits are insured, and I didn't realize that they're up to $160 million on ICS, so I think 140 was last number, and I guess that's because of the growth of the portfolio. Our clients love the fact that they do not need to collateralize their deposits. We offer a very competitive rate of interest, especially on public funds. We have a separate rate schedule for public funds. We look at those rates every Thursday, so tomorrow morning we'll be looking at the rates. I did bring the rates for that reason, but I brought some cards, and anybody who's interested can contact me, and we can email you the rates over. The interest on ICS is earned until the check clears the transaction account. So let me explain how that works. All of our ICS accounts are tied to a transaction account. So checks are issued, just whether they're weekly, monthly, however often. Checks are sent out to the recipients. They're out there until that check is deposited by the payee. So the interest is earned on the deposits until that check sweeps through and clears the account. And at that time, we're going to move money over from ICS into the transaction account to pay that item. So there is a benefit, unlike the way a lot of public funds today, they have pledged securities on their deposit accounts, and they move money around exactly what they need to cover the checks. And so you've got money sitting there that may not be earning interest while you're waiting for those checks to clear the bank account. The sweep between ICS and the checking account is automatic. So what we normally do with our clients is we set a target balance. That balance can be anything from 25,000, it could be 100,000, anything that's less than the 250,000. So every day that balance returns to the target balance in the checking account, because this last item that clears the account is a sweep transaction. So it doesn't matter what the target balance is and what the check amount is, it's going to automatically fund those checks to pay. The other thing that I think is important for folks that are dealing with pool products like Tex Pool, Texas Class, or investments is the fact that there are no external transfers and no wires are needed by our clients. And they all enjoy that. Sometimes it's hard to get wire transfers initiated and get all the signatures or authorizations that are needed. So those are the primary benefits that our customers have enjoyed. Benefits for the bank is, Chris mentioned that they are reciprocated deposits, so they're available for our community for lending, and we do utilize those funds. The deposits are considered local, and they do benefit the community. The program itself attracts large depositors to the bank, so we utilize other services such as treasury management services, the transaction accounts, sometimes money market accounts. So other products besides the Cedars and ICS are utilized for those clients. Mentioned before, pledged securities are no longer needed. They take a lot of time. There's a lot of paperwork, not only for us, but our client when those products or the bonds mature. So no longer necessary to keep up with that. And also, some organizations have changing balances where maybe tax dollars roll in at a certain time of the year, and there's no need to increase pledges at that time. The ICS program ensures deposits. As the balance fluctuates, there's no other paperwork that needs to be done to have that happen automatically. And then the last one is that we set the interest rates. So like I said before, we do have a special rate program for public funds, and I can make that available to anybody who would like it. Some of the customer feedback that we've been able to obtain, they love the fact that there's an automatic sweep that happens, saves them a whole lot of time. Not that long ago, that was not available, and it was continuous monitoring that was required by the client in order to make sure all the funds were FDIC insured, even if we had a pledge because of changing deposit amounts coming in, especially during tax time. The other thing about that makes it automatic for New First is the fact that we have ICS integrated in our core system. And so our clients who log on to their bank account through the treasury management products can actually see the balance in their ICS account. Can't transfer from it, but you can see the balance, which makes it really easy for reconcilement. We do assist some of our larger clients with laddering out their maturities. If we know generally the monthly cash flow, we can help set up a laddered schedule going from 4 weeks, 13, 26, up to 1 year. We don't have a lot of clients that go out further than a year for Cedars, but we also incorporate ICS as well into that, into the ladder. We've already mentioned the reduced paperwork. It's a big deal. Nobody likes paperwork anymore, and having everything that's automatic is certainly helpful. I think that Chris mentioned there's a single monthly statement that provides all of the information, all the Cedars, all the ICS appear on one statement, and our transaction accounts cycle out at the end of the month as well. So you've got everything at the end of the calendar month for reconcilement. If anybody's interested in getting started with New First, what we require is a depository account, and ICS on our system is set up as a checking depository account. So there's no limitation on the withdrawals for ICS, but we do require a transaction account. There's a placement agreement, custodial agreement that gets signed one time per organization. We look at what kind of target balance our clients are looking for, and then we do have an initial order form signed because all the procedures, all of the early withdrawal penalties are outlined on that order form. After that, we can accept renewals by email and no longer need all that paperwork. that's what's needed to get started with us. And any questions?
Thank you all. Hopefully I can be here again next year and do it again. If you do have any questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes and answer those. We also have a couple sort of one-pager sales sheets and a sample statement and our business cards here. So thank you for having me.
Just think about our 5-minute break and then we'll go back.
That was perfect timing, guys.
What do you say?
I can't play it up. We need to be more responsible.
You guys can take lunch. They bring lunch in. That's why I'm raising my hand.
What was her name? Yes.
And he said if she gives you any pushback, let me know.
Okay.
That's a good thing. Hello there. Short time.
What are you trying to do? Upload a video?
They changed a,
Then you just hit that.
Well, which code did you use?
5 letters. Oh, we rolled 5 letters.
Yeah, but he gave 2 codes.
Something like that. Wow.
I do.
Which code did you use? We're trying to get. I don't know. Maybe you can try and share
I like it so loud, you know. Flash drive. Where did he go?
All right. We can get started again. And let's see, it's probably going to take us through lunch, so lunch will be here at noon. So they might pass out on you for about 10 minutes, and then they'll revive diversity in the workplace. Had Karen come in and talk to you a year ago, and thought it was for us to continue to do that again this year, not just for our staff, but also some of the finance council members. So please help me welcome Karen.
Thank you. I just spoke yesterday, I was just back there thinking about it. So this topic, I started speaking on the generations in 2007. And I thought it would be over. I thought, well, the millennials will come in. They called you Gen Y back then. And it's almost 2020. And my 2020 next year is almost booked, speaking on the generation. So it's not going away. So I hope that I give you some, how many of you heard me last year? So I have some new stuff in here. Because here's what's going on right now. The world is changing so fast. And what a lot of us, I'm a baby boomer, and what a lot of us who have been around a while have to realize that it's not going back. And so when we reminisce, and we talk about the way it was, and we talk about the way kids were, that's good, but that is never going to happen again. So it's kind of like, give me a little history, but realize that it's moving forward, because the world is really changing. And so I always like to go back to 2006. 2006 was not that long ago. Does anybody remember their flip phone? Right? How many of you were mad when that flip phone had to go to a smartphone? Does anybody remember me? You had to learn a whole lot of new stuff. Now today, what? You can't live without it. But the flip phone was a big deal. And if you just think back to 2007, the cloud was something that was in the sky. Right? In 2007, 4G was a parking spot. Now we're on 5G. In 2007, apps were something that kids filled out going into college, applications. And I don't know about big data. I think he must have been a rapper from Detroit. You think about all the words that have changed, right? Because when we talk about the cloud right now, we know that it's somewhere. We have no idea where our information is, but it's where? It's hanging out in the cloud, right? So we start to think about how much we've changed since 2008. Really, the phone came in 2007, but most people didn't get their first phone until about 2010. So we're looking at a 9-year span of how much things have changed. And if you sit back and you think about it, it's kind of crazy. So we blame a lot of it, of the things that are going on in the workplace. We blame a lot on young people. But the reality of it is, it's kind of the intersection. It's the intersection of youth, and the intersection of technology, and the intersection of globalization. So we've got globalization, technology, communications, demographics. All of this is why you're stressed. All of this is why things get hard. And what's so interesting is that millennials, young people, are just as stressed as older people, maybe even more stressed. Because we think that young people can adapt, they love to change, but the changes that are going on right now, they're pretty incredible. When we start thinking about artificial intelligence, when we start thinking about where the workplace is going to be in the future, it can be daunting and it can be pretty scary. So I'd like to talk about the word disruption, because in 2008, when the recession hit, disruptions were like, whoa, wow, these changes that are going on are disruptive, right? This Uber thing, you're going to get in this car, there's not going to be any more cabs. How many of you ride Uber or Lyft now? How many have not done it yet? I depend on it. I go to a lot of airports, and I haven't driven my car to an airport in 3 years. I am an Uber or a Lyft junkie in a way, because I use it so much. The disruption that happened in 2008, where people really didn't want to use those words, is the word that people want to use today. They want to be disruptors. It's really interesting how we are shifting our thoughts to disruption. So you've got to really be open to change. You've got to be open to, this is where it's going. Whether we like it or not, this is where it's going. And so my goal is to really open your mind and get you excited actually about the changes that are happening, and to begin to value all of these generations up here. These are all women, because I just did a women's conference and I didn't change it, but guys, I'm sorry. But if you really begin to think about it, we have right now in so many organizations, like in the medical profession, there are 5 generations working, because some of the physicians haven't retired. They're the traditionalists, and we're hiring kids right out of school to maybe answer the phone and begin to do some of the work, and those are Gen Z. So this is the first time in history where we have 5 generations. And if you guys want we've already decided that we can have all my slides, we're going to give you in a PDF. If some of the letters ever fall off of my slides, it's because I work on a map, and I converted it to, what is it that we are? PowerPoint. And so sometimes they don't translate, because I see that T in traditionalist, so excuse me. But these are the generations right now that are out there. Traditionalists, these are people that are 73 and older, okay? Baby boomers, they start at 72. I don't know where they go down to the birth. It's 1946 to 1964. But if your birthday is 1964, 1963, you moved into Gen X. Because you have been really with this so long. So I consider most people who were born in the 60s Gen Xers. Because a lot of it doesn't have to do with the date you were born, it has to do with your head. It's your mindset, it's how you see the world, and what your attitude is like, okay? Yeah, Gen X, I'm going to talk a little bit about you. Do we have any Gen Xers in the room? Do you know if you're one or not? 50s, yeah, you are now. Yeah, you got it, I just gave you, I moved you down. Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit more about Gen X. Millennials who are not kids anymore, how many of you in here are millennials? The millennials go now from 1980 to the 1997. You used to get all the way to 2001, but Gen Z took over some of your people. Any Gen Zs in here? Any Gen Zs? Oh, good. You're my first. Oh, you're not? Okay. You guys cringe so long. I was going to say, oh, she's a Gen Z. Yeah, she's a Gen X. Okay, so sorry. Let me look. So the question is, I've just kind of painted a picture. So how are you doing? How are you doing with change? Are you better with it now? Are you kind of accepting change? Or are we resisting it? I'm not going to take a poll. But a lot of people right now, that the old expression is the train has left the station and it ain't going back. It's not going back. We wanted it to go back after the recession. We thought it would go back in 2009. We were ready for it. It's not. It's not going. So we have to get a different mindset. We have to be open to it. And in my opinion is you have to always have somebody young on your staff. You've always got to have young people teaching you the technology. They may not know the why the technology works that way, but they're going to know a new technology, a new app, something that's going to make your life easier once you figure it out. So I want you to think of me today as a generation tour guide. So I'm taking you on a tour. I'm going to lead you through this. I'm going to inspire you. I'm going to give you some ideas, but think of me more as a tour guide as we begin to go through these generations. The first thing I want to say is, we've been making fun of young people forever, okay? If you start looking at Time magazine or Life magazine that we were back in the 60s, people couldn't stand baby boomers. They thought that they were hippies and that they were crazy. So every generation, every new generation, every young generation that comes on the scene, what do older people do? Right? They're always going to look for the things that are wrong. And I think that that's got to change, because right now, every generation has some challenges, every generation has issues. But if we begin to look at people more in terms of how they're helping us as a resource, I think we can get through this much more. So I'm always going to say we have to stop the generation bashing. Right now, I think the reason that people are bringing me in, I've been trying to think about why is it going more and more and more and more, rather than less and less. And I think because when there's friction, when people start complaining about a generation, baby boomers, we've had a lot of complaints about us. Poor millennials, you've had a ton of complaints. Gen X, you've been hiding in the middle for so long. You've been ignored, and right now you're probably happy because people just aren't picking on you. But if you really begin to think about the lack of generational awareness, it really hurts productivity. It really hurts the morale of a company, the morale of an organization. It really pulls things down. And so our goal right now is to have you more collaborative and feeling a part of the team. So the whole idea is that we want people to feel embedded in their organization, to love where they go to work. Because when people feel embedded in their organization, they feel three things. They feel connected, protected, and respected. We feel connected to each other. You know my name, we talk, we're a team. You came here today, we're one. We were connected to the organization. We feel protected. Protected means that we're going to trust each other. I'm going to trust that you're not going to badmouth me. I'm going to trust that you're going to give me a chance if I make a mistake. And the word is respected. Every generation wants to be respected. So if you leave with nothing else today, I want you to think about every generation wants to feel three things: connected, protected, respected. I call it CPR, breathing new life into the organization. Took a while for me to get to that one. Okay, guys, so what we're going to do is I'm going to take you on a tour, and I'm going to talk just briefly about the generations. The reason I do this is it's an awareness. Sometimes when you begin to understand the why of how people got here, you understand them much better, and you give them a break. You give them a break. So do we have any baby boomers in the room? I'm one. Do we have any other? We have a couple. Okay, so baby boomers, when I started speaking back in 2000, the whole room was baby boomers. And Gen X would go like this. There were a few Gen Xers in the room. If you think about the baby boomer, they were the largest generation that came out after World War II. They were born in 1946, right after the war. The country was very optimistic, okay? Very positive. We had entered a war that we weren't even equipped to enter. We came out a world power. And that was because of traditionalists. That was because of the generation before baby boomers. The baby boomer is born after the war. The country is optimistic. They're very positive. Lots of motivational speaking is coming about right now. The old Zig Ziglars are coming into the world because motivation was a big part of this generation because there were so many of them. It was the largest generation. There were over 80 million in the very beginning. And now it's down quite a bit for obvious reasons. But when you get a generation this big, what it did was it changed the economy. People bought houses. If you start to really study what happened back in the days, in the 50s and the 60s, they were spending their money, and that was why this generation was so powerful. They were big, and they spent money. That's what's going on right now with young people. If you equate the baby boomer, what happened then, you look at what's going on right now in the economy, it's because this generation of young people have buying power, and they're changing the way we did it back then. So these traditional values of a house, kids, live in the suburbs, whatever, are changing with the younger generation. And the reason that we talk about it so much is because there's so many of them. So I want you to think about it as a shift that happened with the baby boomer is happening again with this millennial Gen Z generation. The millennial comes on, the baby boomer comes on the scene as highly competitive because there's so many of them. So this work ethic, this way of running the business is a very motivating way, but it's also a way that they copy from the military. Think about it. We won World War II. Let's look at how the military ran top-down leadership. The baby boomer took that leadership on, and it worked for 30 years. It actually worked. Gen X wanted to change the top-down leadership and have a voice, but we didn't listen because they were what? Such a small generation. So millennials are changing things because there's so many of them. So we have a generation that is adaptive, optimistic, determined, goal-oriented. All of these are great qualities. And the interesting thing about baby boomers right now is they're retiring, but they still want to be in control. They don't want their kids telling them what to do. They still want to be the boss. They still want to be in control. So it's an interesting generation. In the workplace, they have the experience. My advice would be to ask them to get to know how they got through tough times. How did they get, because I'll tell young people, I've been through 13 recessions. I've been through losing all of my business twice. I have reinvented myself more times than anybody else I'm worth talking to. And I think sometimes they look at us, baby boomers, young people, as if we're just old school with no ideas. Get to know people and get to value their experiences. Baby boomers have to realize that we can't keep talking about the way it was. We have to get with the program. We have to modernize ourselves as much as possible so that this generation wants to talk to us. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to move on. Hardworking, experienced, highly motivated relationship masters. And the big thing is right now, they're leaving. They're leaving. Many of them are leaving. And so we need to get from them this transfer of information. I like to tell stories because I think you remember a story more than you remember all of all these facts. So I'm going to tell you a story about Airbnb. It's interesting because I just was at a conference where they were in the audience. And when I was finished talking about the generations, they came up and they told me this story, and I think you're going to like it. This guy over here, his name is Brian Chesney. Brian founded Airbnb when he was in his early 20s. Does anybody know the story? He's from San Francisco, and the rent is really expensive in San Francisco. And Google was having a conference in San Francisco, and all of the hotel rooms were booked. And Chesney had no money, and he and his roommate got this brilliant idea that they were going to get 3 air mattresses, like an academy, and they were going to charge people to sleep in their 1-bedroom apartment for $150 a night for each air mattress. So add it up. So they got 3 people, 2 guys and a woman, who did not know each other. They rented the air mattresses for almost a week. And as they were collecting their money, Chesney said, this is a brilliant idea. And he birthed Airbnb. That's how it came about. Yeah, it's cool. In the beginning, Airbnb was just cheap. It was like a hostel. And you could go, and I actually know this because my daughter lives in D.C., and I rented an Airbnb in the early days. That place was so scary, I thought I was going to get broken into. I put a chair up against the doorknob. I was petrified by myself. It was pretty, in the beginning, it was pretty creepy. He realized by 2013 that he wanted to make it more exclusive. He wanted to give you an experience the way it is today. And so I don't know if any of you have ever read about the Bronx Airbnbs, but the Bronx has the best zoo and the best gardens in the country. And when you go to those Airbnbs in the Bronx, you get to eat with families, and you get to go to the zoo with these families. So it's kind of cool. But he needed help to elevate it from air mattresses and something really cheap to something great. And that's where this guy over here, Chip Connolly, he's a baby boomer. Chip Connolly was like the master of boutique hotels. He would turn these little dives into these amazing boutique hotels, and he was known throughout the world as the master of hotelier. So Brian calls this guy Chip, and he says, we want to elevate Airbnb. Can you help us? He said, we will make you the master of this. We'll give you this directorship. And he brings him on board. Chip says that he's sitting in a room with all 27-year-olds, and they're all talking about technology, and all they talked about was the technology. He said he didn't even know how to use Google Drive at the time. He couldn't even send a document out, and he was listening to them. Now, this is a guy who's made millions of dollars opening hotels, and he said, I wanted to leave. I was so intimidated by their technology. Think about it. He wanted to leave. And he said, but I thought of something. He said, they don't know what I know. They know technology. They don't know what I know. And he came up with this idea that he had wise eyes. And that's what I think of myself as a baby boomer. I have wise eyes. I've been around. And they had fresh eyes. And I think that what we have to begin to realize is the combination of the wise eyes and the fresh eyes that are going to keep an organization going. And for that reason, I tell this story because I think that we've got to learn to respect each other. We've got to learn to respect the wisdom of the elderly and the experience they put in. And we have to respect the ideas and the technology of new people, of young people. And when we put those things together, the bond can't be broken. It's my little story. So stop thinking in terms of old people and young people. Stop generation batching. Start looking at each of us and think about what we can contribute, okay? All right, I gotta move on. I know lunch is coming. I love this generation. I love talking about Gen X because it's a funny generation. Where are my Gen Xers in here? Yeah. So Gen X, you know what? There's never going to be another generation like you. You're the last of the generations who had freedom. So you were a generation that could ride your bike until the street lights came on, you could stay out. Your mom didn't care where you were, just don't come home. If it's not dark, if you came home early, what'd she do? She'd kick you out the door and lock it. You couldn't get back in, right? Think about how we're raising kids today. Right? Mom puts her chair out in front. She sits in the chair, maybe she has a glass of wine with her neighbor, and she says, okay, kids, you can ride your bike from the stop sign and back. And then she looks at her friend and she says, aren't they independent, right? So those days of freedom are gone. Tell your stories. Tell your stories to your kids. They're going to be funny. Share those stories with them so that they can begin to see the differences. They can begin to see it. And give your kids an opportunity to make a mistake. Today we hover over our kids so much. If kids don't make a mistake, if they don't learn to become scrappers, if they don't learn how to hustle, the real world is going to be hard for them. And today we're so protective of our kids, but the reason Gen X is so resilient, they say you're the most resilient of the generations. They say that you can manage both the baby boomers and you can manage the millennials because you have the ability to understand both generations. Your resiliency comes from that independence that you had. Your resiliency comes from that ability to fail. The only thing that I can criticize or judge you on is your attitude. Some of you have a little attitude. Yeah, little one. No, come on, don't you? Yeah, you do. You know, you want to hurry up, get it down, battle it. Knows it because you want to get home. You don't like small talk. You don't like chit chat. You want to get the job done. But you have to manage millennials. And you have to manage Gen Z who's coming on the scene. And they're going to need more of your time. So this is what Generation X says. Come into my office. I'll help you. I have an open door policy. But don't stay too long. And don't ask too many dumb questions. So you're a generation that's a little bit edgy. So what you have to do is soften a little bit. Because the generations coming up are going to need you as a leader. They're going to need you to manage them. And you have to be able to look at people with more empathy. You can't be quite so hardballing. Does that make sense, Gen X? All right, I'm going to move on. This is the Generation X, work-life balance. This is a generation that brought work-life balance on the scene. Today, there's such a different way of looking at the world. You were the ones that were blamed. Because when you came on the scene, the baby boomer was working. They were working long and they were working hard. So when you said you wanted to go watch your kids play baseball, what did they call you? Slacker. They made a movie out of the slackers, right? Baby boomers called you latchkey kids. They called you all kinds of names that you had to resist. That's why you have a thick skin. So now you want work-life balance. And thanks to Gen Z, millennials, you should be thanking Gen X. Because now there is a lot more work-life balance at work, right? They brought it in. They're highly innovative and creative. They're self-reliant and practical. They're independent. And they're cynical. They're questioning and cynical. Why? Something happened when they were growing up. Yes, mom went to work. Yeah. They were totally alone, very independent. And it was a weird time because baby boomers felt guilty about leaving you home. They still did, though. They left you home. There was no Nickelodeon. There was no nannies. It was if you were the oldest kid, you were home. You had to be home. No after school for you. They called you latchkey kids. There were some other things that happened. We were afraid you were going to do things, so we tried to scare you. One of the things that we did was we put lost kids on milk cartons. Remember that? You're eating your Wheaties, you're eating your cereal in the morning, and you look at the neighbor's missing. And It scared you. Who would have lost children on milk cartons today? But we did that to you. Halloween, does anybody remember Halloween? Gen X? Don't eat the candy, right? Don't eat those apples. Why? Poison. They were going to put what? Razor blades. Who would tell? Would you tell your 8-year-old today not to eat the candy? There's razor blades in it. It would scare him to death. Well, we scared you to death, and then we thought you'd be smoking pot when we were gone. We were so worried you were going to be doing drugs that we had a commercial. Does anybody remember the frying pan coming on the scene at all? This is your brain with cracked an egg. This is your brain on drugs. This is how we scared you, right? Did it work? I don't know. It made you cynical. It made you questioning, okay? So you are the generation that brought about CarMax. You hate salespeople, you hate middlemen, you want to do it all yourself. You love Google. You are you figured it all out yourself. And it's an interesting generation because you brought this independence into the workplace. So today you are the leading. You have to lead these other two generations, so you have to soften just a little bit. Now we've got millennials. The change is real. They bring about a new mindset, a new skill set. So where are the millennials in the room? So there's two generations of millennials, okay? There's, I know I did this one, hang on. I guess I didn't put it in. There's the people that are in their 30s. So are there any 30-year-olds in here? 30, 31, 32, 30, yeah. So what are you? Do you think you're a millennial? Nah. Do you want to be called a millennial? So people that are in their 30s, and where are you again? You're Xennials. You're half millennial and you're half Generation X. You have the work ethic of Gen X, but you have the heart and you want the purpose of a millennial. So you're the combination of both. So we're not really calling you, when we talk about millennials right now in the workplace, we're talking about people in their 20s. We're really talking about that 20-year-old. We're really talking about people that have been in the job 4 years or less. So do we have any of those in here? A couple. Yeah, so lucky for you, we've got a new generation coming. So I hope that we stop talking about millennials and we have Gen Z coming. But this generation came about the same time as the technology. And so this generation, which is just as big as the baby boomer. So as we talked about the baby boomer changing the world and never looking back, that's what millennials are doing. They are changing the world and they're not looking back. They're the best educated of all the generations that I put so far, because we don't know what Gen Z is going to be doing right now. They're independent, yet they're team players, which is good. They're optimistic and ambitious. They're open to new ideas. They're highly social. They're tech savvy, innovative, adaptive, and they have a lot of anxiety. They have a lot of worries. What we're learning is that they are really stressed out. They're worried about money. They're worried about school debt. They're worried about buying a house or a car, or how do you save up for money? Because you know what? Times are tough. The times are a lot different than they were back in 1986. And this generation has a lot of stress. And a lot of the stress is due to financial, okay? So we have to begin to understand them, and especially at work, because they want to know how they're doing because they're afraid that they're not doing well. And so it's going to take a different mentality to start to lead and advantage young people. And I'll say it again, they have more fears than people who have been in the workplace a long time. And when we begin to get Gen Z on the scene, which is coming right after the millennials, well, I'll keep this up for 1 second. When we have Gen Z on the scene, which is, these are the youngest ones, but when they're coming on the scene, they have even more fears because they're worried about their safety. They're worried about the environment. They're worried that they're not going to be here in 20 years. They're worried the world isn't going to be here. So I want you to begin to understand young people with a different lens. They have more anxiety than you do. They have more fear because they have more doubt. And so we have to begin to have conversations with people. We have to begin to really have relationships with people, So when we look at millennials, they want purpose in the workplace. They want social interaction. They like liking people at work. They would love having more millennials with them. They like being with millennials. And if you notice, if anybody ever noticed that they go out in groups, they hang out a lot, right? So they're out at night, they're always in groups. They're a very, very social group. Even though we blame them for being on social media all the time, they are physically social. okay? And so that means that at work, they want to be on teams with other millennials, and they will get projects done if you put them with with several other young people. They will work a lot more. They want feedback. We just talked yesterday at the bank about feedback and how to give feedback. They want feedback. They want to know how they're doing. They want to know how they're doing for two reasons. Number one, because everybody wants to know how they're doing, but number two, to alleviate their stress. To know that they're going to be here another year. Because their biggest fear is what? Finance, and maybe being let go. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, that a lot of the reason why they want feedback so much is because it gives them relaxes the stress. They want challenging work, career development, and they want flexibility. So one of the things that we're going to talk about in a minute is being honest and having critical conversations with people. I think we have to tell people what the workload looks like. You know, they want interesting work, well, so do I, but not all work is interesting. So we have to begin to learn how to speak and tell the truth. I've heard an expression once before, it says, say what you mean, but don't say it mean. So we really have to say what we mean with a positive voice, but the words have to be said, because sometimes what you're thinking is not what they're thinking. So we have to get a clarity on how we want to get the job done. So now we've got Gen Z, and it's really interesting because the research is out. We don't really know yet because we haven't been in the workplace that long. So I've been speaking at a lot of universities, which I would think would know all about Gen Z. But the employees that work at the universities do not. Maybe some of the professors do, but the people that help run the university, the student housing, the food services, are having a harder time with young people in the university area. Do any of you have kids in college? Guess what? A lot of them don't want to stay. They want to come home. They're finding more kids are leaving school than ever before. They're finding that they're having a difficult time socializing because they're on their phone. And they'll say they have a lot of friends, but their friends are here, and they're not really talking to the people that are in the group, and there's a lot more unhappiness. So I worked with Illinois State and Iowa State, both I's, and the director drove me to the airport, and he said, the most expensive part right now of the university budget is mental services. Kids are going to therapists. Kids are having a lot of problems. Just in schools, being away from home, whatever. So I want you to begin to think about kids, and I want you to begin to think about how they're different from you, and how you, especially when they start getting into the workplace, how you can begin to manage them, because it's going to be a totally different generation. Why do you think? Think about this generation. They were born 1997 are the ones that are now going off to school, 1998. So what happened in 2001? And then what happened with all the school shootings? So a lot of times when kids hear a noise, they freak out. There was just a kind of a loud noise at a mall. Someone actually wrote me here in Houston, and she said the baby boomers and the Gen X were shopping. They go, don't worry, it's a false alarm, and all the young people ran out of the mall. So it's interesting that some of us, we're used to, we feel like things will be okay, and others take that loud noise as a warning sign to get out. So we're not all the same with our experiences. So as we begin to look at the generations, I want you to really begin to think about the differences and why people are like the way they are, and then look for the similarities. The similarities are we all want to be connected, we all want to be protected, and we all want to be respected. If you keep that in mind as what we want, I think it will help you with working with the generations. So we have to learn to listen. We have to learn to ask more questions. Hey, tell me about what it was like. What was your first job? You've got to ask when you get some new hires in. You've got to ask them questions. Because you can't assume that they were raised just like you. You can't assume that their experiences are the same. So you want to really get to know them a little bit better than maybe you've tried in the past. We need to get to know people. When we get to know people on a different level, they feel connected. So what do you think the future of work looks like? Let's think about it for 1 second. What do you think it looks like? Does it look like this? Huh? Yeah, we don't know what the future of know, so I have the luxury, guys, my life is so interesting, of speaking at these conferences where I have no idea I walk into these things, I have no idea what I'm going to find. And 2 months ago, I spoke to an international company who does call centers. Their company's name is Cytel, and they do call centers for Macy's, for Costco, for Airbnb, that's where they were in the audience. They do the call centers for 500 organizations, the big ones, Wells Fargo. And the whole conference was about teaching people how to be human. What they're saying is, if we talk about technology taking over jobs, technology cannot take over human-to-human relationships. The better you are as a manager, the better you are at just growing your team, the better you are at talking to people, learning how to ask questions, having empathy and understanding, realizing that everyone we hire is going to come from a different place. When we talk about diversity, we're just talking about age diversity, but think about people are coming here from different countries, people have different religious beliefs. There's so many different variables going into work right now that the people that succeed, this is what I heard at the conference, will have the human touch. So what they're trying to do at call centers, because they're hiring the very youngest of the young, is teaching young people. This is call centers all over the world. They were there from Spain, Puerto Rico. I was amazed. Guess what they're teaching them to do? Talk on the phone and have empathy. They're teaching people how to have empathy. So I can't tell you what the future of work is going to be like, but I can tell you that the better you connect with people, the better you take just a little bit of time out during your day to get to know someone just a little bit, the more that you can maybe help someone with their job, the more successful you're going to be. Because we don't know where it's going. But what we can do is, so as the technology gets stronger and stronger, the human touch has to get stronger and stronger. They had a really great slide that they said, it used to be B2B, that was called B2B, business to business, and now it's going to be H to H, human to human. So I went to an entire conference on bringing humanness back to work. And I think when I left there, I felt better. Because I know people are afraid that the tech, we don't know where the AI is going to go and where all the robots are going to go. But what we do know is that nobody can replace a human as far as the relationships go, as far as leading, as far as managing, as far as guiding. So I'll leave you with that, human to human. It's all about engagement. It's about building trust, taking ownership, having a sense of pride in your work, talking positively about your work, having open communications where you're willing to hear people who have different opinions. I think that's the secret. I always say, now, hey, tell me more about that. I remember making fun of Twitter, like actually making fun of it. Like, oh yeah, I sent out a tweet years ago. Look at how Trump communicates. They were saying how every president uses a different tool. Twitter has become such an amazing tool for some. I didn't want to hear anything about it. Now I'm interested. Well, how does it work? What does it do? So if we can be more curious, if we can begin to listen more and ask questions, whether we agree or not, you're going to get more information when you're quiet and you're asking questions than when you're doing the talking. Take it from a talker. Okay? Yeah. So it's about people and it's about collaboration. So I'm going to close it down. I don't even know how I kind of went through it fast. How are we doing on time? Okay, great. So I always play a game at the end. And so I play a game at the end. Studies show that if I can get you to smile, you're going to remember a little bit of what I said. But what I want you to remember the most is CPR. Connected, protected, respected. And treating everyone with respect. And understanding that the generations that are coming in are going to be very different. They're going to be very different. And we tend to make fun of and throw them under the bus. Let's hope that we don't do to this Gen Z what we've done to millennials. I want to apologize to millennials all the time because it's become a constant where we're always talking about the trophies and talking about the entitlement. So let's kind of take that away. Even though I mentioned it, let's take it away. So what I want you to do is to learn how to collaborate with the generation. So we're going to play a game. If you were here last year, you know the game, where you need to be in teams of about 6. So turn your chairs around and just get 6 of you together before I start it. You're going to like it. But you can't play by yourself. generational lane. We went down and we talked about childhood. I'm going to play a TV theme song from a generation. Yeah. What you have to do is whisper. The first slide will be this song. And you whisper, okay, so who knows that one? Da, 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 and then you decide. The second slide will be the answer. If you get the answer right, I want you to make a fist and go, yes, so I can see who didn't get it. So if you get it right, what are you going to do? Yes. Oh. Do a little bit. If you get it right, what are you going to do? Yes. Okay, yes, okay. If you don't get it right, I'm going to go. Okay. So kind of huddle. All right, here. I don't know how loud this is. Is it loud? Okay, let's see what we got. Oh, we gotta make it louder. Hang on, real loud. This is the easiest one. Can you make it louder? Hang on, guys. We won't be able. Just wait. This is the easy one. We're gonna get it really loud. Okay, and here's Law and Order. Who got it? Guys, you got it. Yes, so we're going to do this. You didn't get it? Did you get it? Everybody gonna know. If you get it right, what are you gonna do? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, here's, let's go. Let's go. Yes. Oh, it was, it didn't come on. Okay, it was Magnet. Sorry. Oh, would you have known it? Oh, I hope this one works. Okay, hang on. Are you ready? Who got it? Did you get it? Whoever got lucky, stand up. We'll give you applause. Stand up. There's always one lucky in the room. Okay, thank you. All right, what about this one? Did anybody not get NASH? So if I was doing this with all young people, they don't know NASH. They don't know NASH. I don't know. 4077. Well, you might be a baby boomer. You probably was a Gen X, but you just ruined it. All right, what about this one? All right, ready? Let's see how cool you are. Did you get it? Everybody get it. Even the 2-year-old knows Friends. Everybody knows Friends. How about this one? I should take this one down because I'm so sad. Ready? Game of Thrones. You get it? Did you guys get it? No? Oh, no? Okay. All right, here we go. You are so lucky to have them. Here we go. If you know the words to this one, sing along. Okay. Oh! Let me hear if you know the words. This is the singing part. Story all about how I got flipped turned upside down. And I'd like to take a minute, just sit right there. say that. Okay, I'm going to close it down with a quick story, and hopefully your lunch will be here, but I won't be leaving. When I started speaking in 2000, so I had retail clothing stores. I've had so many different lives, but I moved to Houston and I opened a clothing store. And I had, in the end, I opened in the 80s. I was in my 20s. I'm laughing. Because today people in their 20s have no idea. I knew I was going to open a store, moved to Houston, and opened the store. I heard there was no zoning, so I opened in my house. There was zoning in my neighborhood, so I had to go into a store. Every year, I would hire, one of my nieces would graduate. I went to Ohio State, they would graduate. In the end, I had 4 stores, and I had all my nieces down here running my stores. Life was the coolest, if you can imagine. I was like loving it, because I had young nieces around me, and I had my kids. It was really cool. Until it wasn't. It started getting rough with Madonna. When she sang Like a Virgin, MTV came out back then. I don't know, see, we could do a history book on TV, but MTV came out in the 80s, and Like a Virgin was big. And young girls got to see rock and roll. Before that, they were dressing like their moms and their grandmas. They were wearing monogram sweaters. But when they saw Madonna, kids changed. And I really lost some of my business, but I didn't notice it. I just kept working harder. I think in the late 80s, the early 90s, casual dress came on the scene. It really hit in the mid, like 1994, 1995. All the oil companies allowed you to have casual Friday. People were wearing clothes they mowed the lawn into work. I mean, it was pitiful. Nobody was shopping for my store at all. And I had to close. In 1998, I closed my business. I didn't sell it, I had to close it. And it was the hardest time in my life because number one, I had to realize that I had failed. And number two, I wanted to become a speaker. Imagine telling people how to live their life when you had just gone through the worst closing of your life, of your business. So I had a lot of issues to really kind of weed out. And I began to look at my life and decide that I was going to speak on change. That's what I started with in the beginning. I realized that my downfall was I didn't notice young people. I didn't notice what young people were doing. I didn't notice MTV. I didn't notice what was going on TV. I didn't notice that the trends were getting more and more casual. I didn't notice that women weren't dressing for work. I just kept trying to sell what I did, preppy suits and clothes to people who didn't buy it. It was a big lesson, and that lesson has stayed with me for so long because I was trying to make it work, doing what I knew best instead of looking at where the world was going. I'm glad I closed those stores. I didn't want to sell clothes anymore. I love what I do right now. But I think if I hadn't really noticed the biggest mistakes I've made in my life, I don't think I'd be here today. Because I have an understanding of resistance to change. Because I resisted it for years. So I have an understanding that I can tell you that you've got to begin to seek out people and ideas that are different. You've got to seek out young people. You've got to stop telling them, and this is for every person in this room, because there's a younger generation coming. We've got to stop telling them what we know, which we will tell them, and listen to what they know. Because they're going to shift the tides. So no matter how much we want to hold on to the past, no matter how much we want to hold on to the way things were, it's going to move. And so bring people into your life. So when I started speaking and I thought I would only speak to women's conferences. Oh, let me change the slides here. I thought that because I came from a women's clothing store, I was just going to speak at women's conferences. I thought that would be it. They didn't pay very much back in 2000, but I thought that would be what I would do. And I was speaking on a stage here in Houston, and a guy named Garrison Wynn, there's Garrison up there. He comes from stand-up comedy. He's funny. He came and he heard me speak. It was like an honor for him to come and hear me. When I was done, he said to me, I want to help you. I want to be your coach. And he said, you need to speak corporate. He said, I'm going to coach you and help you how to speak corporate. And he did. And if I hadn't been a guy, I'm being really honest with you, because I would have gone with a woman. That would be my natural instinct. And I would have been doing women's conferences. I wouldn't be here. But he shifted my whole way of thinking by getting a male perspective. So I started speaking, and it was working really, really well. And in 2007, I met a young African-American girl. Her name was Crystal Washington. She was in her early 20s. And she was a big deal on social media. And I'd written a book with my daughter, and Crystal promoted my book on the Facebook back then. And I think I sold 50 books that day from her promoting me. So I called her and I said, I didn't get to know you. And I said, I want you to teach me social media. It was now 2008. The world had come to a crashing halt. All my business in 2009 was canceled, and I said, I've got a whole year with nothing to do. Come and help me, teach me social media. She and I got together at the end of 2008, early 2009. She's 23, African American, a little Afro puff. You know, here I am, a grandma. And we combined forces and we opened a company called Social Opportunities. And I taught her how to be a speaker. She taught me social media. She's a big speaker now, big time, international. She just came back from Spain. She speaks on the future of technology. And she's one of my best friends. I would have never, ever thought to ask a 23-year-old advice in my early days. But I could see that she was a resource. And I could see that I could help her too. And so if you combine forces, if you include people who you are not like, we talk about diversity all the time. If you hang out with people just like you, you're going to get ideas you already know. I want you to think about diversity and ideas and growth. And I want you to widen your net. And I want you to include more people in your circle, because if you do, I know you'll have a successful future. Have a good lunch, guys. Lunch game is perfect timing. Thanks for having me. Thanks again. Thank you for having me. It's lunchtime. Not quite yet.
They're setting up, so it looks like in a few minutes we'll get that.
Thank you.
We have full turkey.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. Yeah, you're going to verify the mental.
I accidentally bought it.
Yeah.
Just double checking.
That's caffeine to me, and I don't want to. You like that?
Stephanie. Alicia didn't come in.
Yeah, I'm going to reschedule the last one. I need to give you that QR code to service.
So you're gonna get to like.
Okay, get the phone. Did you like the video? I just told you to get the phone. Oh, can you?
Yes, your wife, yes, yeah. Yeah, you can go to the store. That's her.
I did remember, because you said it, I was like,
Well, that's
yeah, I don't want to